For my 32nd birthday, my grandmother handed me a folder containing a $48 million hotel empire. 5 minutes later, my mother told me to pack my bags and get out of her house because I refused to let her new husband control it. But what neither of them knew was that the house they were kicking me out of was actually part of the empire I just inherited. Before I tell you how I evicted my own mother, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to remind your family that respect is a currency they cannot afford to counterfeit. My name is Sophia, and silence has always been my loudest weapon. The heavy mahogany doors of the private dining room at the Onyx Hotel were closed, shutting out the noise of downtown Atlanta. Inside, the air smelled of fresh white lilies and expensive scotch. Across the table, Grandma Hattie sat with the posture of a queen who had built a kingdom from scratch. She did not look 78. Her eyes were sharp, scanning my face as she slid a thick blue velvet folder across the pristine white tablecloth. My heart hammered against my ribs. I knew what this was. I had spent the last 10 years as the CFO of Hattie's Heritage Group, fixing budgets, negotiating with unions, and turning our red numbers into black. But ownership was a different beast. "Happy birthday." Sophia Grandma said, her voice steady and low. "Open it." My fingers trembled slightly as I lifted the cover. The legal jargon was dense, but the bold letters at the top were clear. Transfer of ownership, 100% equity, the Onyx Hotel. The flagship property of our family, valued at $48 million, was now legally mine. I looked up at her, tears stinging my eyes. "Grandma, are you sure this is your life's work?" She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Her skin was cool, her grip surprisingly strong. "You are the only one who knows the value of hard work, Sophia. Your mother thinks money grows on trees, and your sister thinks it grows on Instagram. You are the protector of this legacy now. Do not let the vultures pick it apart." I barely had time to whisper a thank you before the serene atmosphere was shattered. The heavy doors didn't just open, they were practically thrown off their hinges. The noise made the crystal glasses on the table jump. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. The chaotic energy of my mother Clarissa and her new husband Brad sucked the oxygen right out of the room. Trailing behind them was my younger sister Tanisha, her face illuminated by the blue light of her phone screen, completely uninterested in anything that didn't involve a filter. "Well, isn't this cozy?" Brad announced. His voice was too loud, too confident for a man who was wearing a suit that was clearly a size too small. He walked in like he owned the place, his eyes immediately raking over the expensive decor with a critical, almost sneering expression. Mom rushed over her heels, clicking frantically against the marble floor. She wrapped me in a perfumed hug that felt more like a suffocation attempt. "Happy birthday, baby girl. Oh, look at you having a private dinner without us. We had to argue with the hostess for 10 minutes just to find out which room you were in. Can you believe the service in this place?" I gently disentangled myself from her. "Hello, Mom. I thought we agreed I would celebrate with Grandma tonight and see you guys on Sunday." Brad didn't wait for an invitation. He pulled out the chair next to me, the legs scraping harshly against the floor. He dropped a small crumpled envelope onto my plate, right next to the blue folder I had instinctively covered with my hand. "Sunday works for regular people, Sophia, but family shows up on the day. Here, don't say I never gave you anything." I opened the envelope. Inside was a Starbucks gift card. I turned it over. $20. The irony was so thick I could taste it. I was sitting on top of a $48 million asset, and the man who had been married to my mother for exactly 6 months was gifting me 3 lattes and a cake pop. "Thanks, Brad," I said, my voice flat. He waved a hand dismissively, already pouring himself a glass of Grandma's vintage wine without asking. "Don't mention it. You know, looking around this place, it's remarkably dated. The velvet is too heavy, the lighting is too dim. If this hotel wants to compete with the big boys in Buckhead, it needs a modern facelift. Luckily for you, I have an eye for real estate. I could probably draw up some renovation plans for Hattie here." I felt the heat rising in my neck. Grandma Hattie sat perfectly still, sipping her water, her eyes locked on Brad with the intensity of a sniper. Brad was a failed real estate agent who had filed for bankruptcy 3 times. The only thing he had successfully developed was a gambling addiction and a talent for spending my mother's alimony checks from my biological father. Grandma doesn't need renovation plans, Brad, I said, keeping my tone polite but icy. The Onyx just had its most profitable quarter in history. The vintage aesthetic is what our clientele pays for. Brad chuckled, a condescending sound that grated on my nerves. See, Clarissa? This is what I'm talking about. Sophia is great with the calculators, excellent at counting beans, but she lacks vision. She doesn't understand the market. Tanisha finally looked up from her phone, popping a piece of gum. Can we order food? I'm starving and this room smells like old people. Clarissa laughed nervously, patting Tanisha's arm. Hush now, sweetie. Brad, honey, let's not talk shop on Sophia's birthday. We are here to celebrate. Brad leaned back, swirling the wine in his glass, looking at me with a smirk that made my stomach turn. Right, celebrate. So 32, huh? Still single, still working 12-hour days for your grandmother. When are you going to get a real life? Sophia? A woman your age should be thinking about a husband, not balance sheets. That was it. The disrespect was palpable. I looked at Grandma. She gave me a nearly imperceptible nod. It was time. Actually, Brad, I said, sitting up straighter. I was just discussing my future with Grandma. I moved my hand, revealing the blue velvet folder. I opened it slowly, letting the heavy paper catch the light. Brad's eyes darted to the document. He squinted, trying to read the text upside down. What is that? Clarissa asked, sensing the shift in the room. It is a deed, Mom, I said, my voice ringing clear in the silence. Effective immediately, Grandma has transferred full ownership of the Onyx Hotel and the entire Hattie's Heritage brand to me. I am not just the CFO anymore. I am the owner and CEO. The silence that followed was deafening. Tanisha stopped chewing her gum. Clarissa's mouth fell open in a perfect O. But it was Brad's reaction that was the most telling. His face went from arrogant to pale, and then in a split second, a greedy flush crept up his neck. His eyes widened, calculating, assessing, devouring the number he knew was attached to this building. You, Clarissa gasped. Hattie, Mom, is this true? You gave it all to Sophia. What about Tanisha? What about the family? Grandma spoke for the first time since they entered, her voice cutting through the air like a knife. Sophia earned it, Clarissa. She has run this place for a decade. Tanisha has never worked a day in her life, and I do not trust anyone else with my legacy. Brad stood up abruptly, knocking his chair back. He buttoned his tight suit jacket, his demeanor changing instantly. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a slick, predatory charm. He walked around the table and placed his hands on my shoulders. I flinched, but I didn't move. Well, now this is huge news, he exclaimed, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Sophia? I apologize. I didn't know Grandma was ready to step down. This changes everything. Congratulations, sweetheart. This is a massive responsibility. Too massive for one person, really. He looked at Clarissa, giving her a pointed look. Clarissa blinked, then nodded vigorously, falling into line as she always did. Yes? Yes, Brad is right. Oh my God, Sophia, $48 million. You can't handle that alone. You're just a girl, you don't know how to deal with the sharks in this industry. Brad squeezed my shoulders. Exactly. But don't worry, we are family. We step up. Here is what we are going to do. Since I have the real estate license and the experience, I will step in as the president of operations. Clarissa can handle HR and personnel. You can stay on as CFO, keep doing the numbers since you are good at that. We will set up a family trust to manage the assets. It's better for tax purposes if we pool the resources. I stared at him, unable to comprehend the sheer audacity. 5 minutes ago, I was a bean counter with no vision. Now that I was a multimillionaire, he wanted to be my partner. He wanted access. He wanted control. I slowly reached up and removed his hands from my shoulders, as if they were covered in slime. I stood up facing him eye to eye. He was barely an inch taller than me in my heels. "No," I said. The smile on Brad's face flickered. "Excuse me," I said. "No, Brad. There will be no family trust. There will be no president of operations title for you. I have a full executive team that I hired myself. I don't need help. And I certainly don't need a failed realtor telling me how to run a company that generates more revenue in a week than you have made in your entire life." The room temperature seemed to drop 20 degrees. Clarissa gasped, clutching her pearls. "Sophia, how dare you speak to your father that way?" "He is not my father, Mom," I snapped, looking at her. "He is your husband, and he is a guest in my hotel." Brad's face turned a dark, ugly shade of red. The charming mask disintegrated. He leaned in close, his breath smelling of stale tobacco and my grandmother's wine. "Listen to me, you ungrateful little brat. You think a piece of paper makes you a boss? You are nothing without this family. You are selfish, just like your biological dad. We are trying to help you. You are trying to rob me." I corrected him, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "And it's not going to happen. Now please leave. This is a private dinner." Clarissa stood up, her face twisted in rage. She wasn't seeing her daughter. She was seeing an obstacle to her husband's happiness, an obstacle to the lifestyle she thought she deserved. She pointed a manicured finger at my face. "You apologize to him right now, Sophia. Apologize and sign whatever papers Brad thinks are necessary. We are a family and we share." I closed the blue folder and handed it to Grandma for safekeeping. "No, Mom." Clarissa's eyes narrowed. "Fine. If you want to be the big bad boss, go ahead. But don't expect to come back to my house tonight. If you can't respect the head of our household, then you don't live under his roof. Pack your bags, Sophia. Get out, tonight." I looked at her, really looked at her. I saw the fear in her eyes, the desperation to keep a man who clearly didn't love her, only her potential utility. And I felt a wave of sadness wash over me, followed immediately by a cold, hard resolve. "You are kicking me out?" I asked softly. "Yes," Clarissa hissed. "Let's see how you handle the real world without your mommy's safety net. Maybe a night on the street will teach you some humility." Grandma Hattie started to say something, but I silenced her with a look. I didn't need saving, not anymore. I picked up my clutch and the $20 gift card. I tossed the card back onto the table. It slid across the white cloth and landed right in front of Brad. "Keep it, Brad," I said, turning to walk toward the door. "You're going to need it more than I do." I walked out of the room, my heart pounding but my head held high. My mother thought she had played a trump card. She thought rendering me homeless would break me. But as I walked through the lobby of the Onyx, listening to the soft jazz music and seeing the staff nod respectfully at me, I realized something she didn't. I wasn't homeless. I was home. And the war for my empire had just begun. The heavy oak doors of the private dining room had barely swung shut behind me before I heard the frantic clicking of heels against the marble floor. I did not stop walking. My destination was the exit, the valet stand, and anywhere that did not smell of my mother's desperate perfume and Brad's cheap cologne. But Clarissa was fast when she was motivated, and nothing motivated my mother quite like the threat of losing access to money she had not earned. "Sophia, Sophia, you stop right there." Her voice echoed through the corridor, causing a busboy carrying a tray of dirty dishes to freeze and press himself against the wall. I sighed, closing my eyes for a brief second to gather my strength, then turned around. My mother was breathless, her chest heaving beneath her silk blouse. Tanisha trailed behind her phone, still in hand, looking more annoyed that she had to walk than upset about the family implosion. Brad was the last to emerge, strolling leisurely with his hands in his pockets, a predator who knew his prey was cornered. "You are walking away from your mother," Clarissa screeched, closing the distance between us. I grabbed her arm, but she yanked it away. After everything I have done for you, I labored for 18 hours to bring you into this world. I wiped your nose, I paid for your braces, I sacrificed my youth so you could go to those fancy schools and look down your nose at us. And this is how you repay me, by stealing from your own sister. I looked at Tanisha, who was busy examining her cuticles. Stealing? I asked calmly. Grandma left the hotel to me. Tanisha is 28 years old. She has a degree in fashion marketing she has never used. I offered her a job in the PR department 3 times. She quit 3 times because she said waking up before noon was bad for her complexion. Tanisha rolled her eyes. God, you are so dramatic, Sophia. I didn't quit. I took a sabbatical to focus on my personal brand. And anyway, that is not the point. The point is that we are a family. If you have $48 million and I have zero, that is not fair. Communism works in theory, but in this family apparently it is just greed. It is not greed to keep what you earn. Tanisha, I said, keeping my voice low. Clarissa stepped in front of Tanisha, acting the part of the protective lioness, a role she only played when an audience was present. Do not you dare lecture her. You have always been this way. Cold, calculated. You think because you have a fancy title and a corner office that you are better than us? You are not better than us, Sophia. You are just lucky that your grandmother has a soft spot for the firstborn. But let me tell you something about the real world. A woman cannot run an empire alone. You need a man's protection. You need Brad. I almost laughed. I need Brad. Mom. Brad has a credit score lower than the temperature outside. He is not a protector. He is a parasite. The slap didn't hit my face. It hit my soul. Clarissa didn't strike me with her hand. She struck me with her words, her face twisting into something ugly and unrecognizable. Shut up! She screamed, her voice cracking. You do not know him. He loves me. He is the only man who has ever stayed. Your father left. Your stepfathers left. But Brad is here. And he is trying to help us build a future. Why can't you just be happy for me? Why do you have to ruin everything I touch? You are so selfish, Sophia. You want to see me alone and destitute, don't you? That is your plan. You want to hoard all the money so you can watch us beg. I stared at her, seeing the hysteria rising in her eyes. It was a performance I had seen 1,000 times. The victimhood. The weaponized tears. She was rewriting history in real time to make herself the martyr and me the villain. I do not want you to beg, Mom, I said, feeling a deep exhaustion settling in my bones. I want you to open your eyes. But I can't force you to see what you refuse to look at. Brad finally stepped forward. He moved into my personal space, looming over me. The hallway was empty now, the staff having wisely scattered to avoid the fallout. He looked at me with a smirk that didn't reach his eyes, then turned his gaze to my mother. Look at her, Clarissa, he said softly, his voice dripping with false sympathy. Look at her face. She is laughing at you inside. She thinks you are pathetic. She thinks she is the queen of Atlanta now because she got a handout. She doesn't respect you as a mother. She doesn't respect me as the head of the household. She is standing there judging us, thinking she is untouchable. He was pouring gasoline on a fire that was already out of control. He knew exactly which buttons to push. My mother's insecurity was a piano, and Brad was a virtuoso player. She does not respect me, Clarissa whispered, her eyes filling with fresh tears. She never has. I tried to step back to disengage. Mom, this is going nowhere. We are tired. Let's talk about this when you are calm. I am calm? Clarissa shrieked. She reached for a glass of red wine that had been left on a waiter's tray on a nearby side table. I didn't even register what was happening until the cold liquid splashed across my chest. The shock was immediate. The dark crimson stain spread instantly across the white silk of my blouse, soaking through to my skin, cold and sticky. Drops of expensive Cabernet splattered onto my neck and chin. I stood frozen, my hands hovering away from my body, looking down at the ruin of my clothes. Tanisha gasped, actually looking up from her phone for real this time. Whoa, Mom! Clarissa stood there, the empty glass shaking in her hand, her chest heaving. She didn't look sorry. She looked triumphant, like she had finally made a mark on me that I couldn't just wipe away with a bank transfer. You want to act like you are above us? Clarissa hissed, stepping closer, her eyes wild. You want to be the big boss? Fine. But you do not get to disrespect my husband and live in my house. You do not get to sleep under the roof Brad provides while you treat him like dirt. The roof Brad provides? I repeated, my voice deadly quiet. Mom, I pay the mortgage on that house. I have paid it for the last 3 years. I don't care, she screamed. It is my name on the deed. It is my home. And Brad is the man of the house. So here is the deal, Sophia. You have 2 choices. You apologize to Brad right now on your knees if you have to, and you sign a document giving him power of attorney over the hotel operations so we can manage this as a family. Or you get out. She pointed a shaking finger toward the hotel entrance. You leave tonight. You take your clothes, your fancy shoes, and your superior attitude, and you get out of my life. You are dead to me until you learn your place. The hallway fell silent. The only sound was the soft hum of the air conditioning and the distant clatter of the kitchen. Brad stood with his arms crossed, a smug, satisfied grin plastered on his face. He thought he had won. He thought the threat of homelessness, the emotional violence of being disowned by my mother, would break me. He expected me to cry. He expected me to beg. I slowly reached into my purse and pulled out a tissue. I dabbed at the wine dripping from my chin. I didn't try to clean the blouse. It was ruined, just like my relationship with the woman standing in front of me. I looked at Clarissa. I looked past the rage and saw the fear. She was terrified of aging, terrified of being poor, terrified of being alone. And because of that terror, she had sold her soul to a con artist. I felt a strange sense of detachment. The cord was cut. The obligation was gone. Okay, I said. Clarissa blinked, her momentum stalling. What? I said, okay. I repeated, my voice steady, devoid of any emotion. I accept your terms. Brad's smile faltered slightly. Sophia, don't be rash. Your mother is just upset. You don't have to leave if you just... No, Brad, I interrupted, turning my cold gaze on him. She gave me a choice. I made it. I dropped the wine-soaked tissue onto the floor at Brad's feet. I am not coming home, not tonight, not ever. You can keep the room. You can keep the memories. And Mom, since you are so concerned about the mortgage, I suggest you ask the head of the household to start making the payments. I am canceling the standing order at the bank in the morning. Clarissa's face went pale. Sophia, you can't. I turned my back on them. I walked away. I heard Tanisha whisper something like, she's really doing it, and my mother sobbing, but I didn't look back. I walked through the lobby of the Onyx Hotel, the red stain on my chest like a war paint. The concierge, a man named Mr. Henderson, who had known me since I was an intern, looked up and saw the state of me. His eyes widened, but his professional mask slipped back into place instantly. Ms. Sophia, he said, rushing out from behind the desk. Are you all right? Do you need security? Or a towel? I stopped in the center of the lobby. The chandelier above sparkled, casting prisms of light onto the marble floor. This was my lobby. These were my people. I am fine, Mr. Henderson, I said, my voice strong. I need a room. Of course, he said, reaching for the computer. We have a junior suite available on the No, I cut him off gently. Not a suite. I need the penthouse. Mr. Henderson paused. The penthouse. But, Ms. Sophia, that is reserved for VIPs, and I am the owner, Mr. Henderson. I said, not arrogantly, but with the weight of the truth. As of tonight, I own this building, and I will be taking up residence in the penthouse indefinitely. Please have my things sent up from my car. And tell security that if a woman named Clarissa or a man named Brad tries to access the elevators, they are to be escorted off the property immediately. Mr. Henderson looked at me, really looked at me, and saw the steel in my spine. He nodded, a slow smile spreading across his face. Yes, ma'am. Right away. Here is the master key. I took the gold keycard. I walked to the private elevator, the one that required biometric access. I pressed my thumb to the scanner. It beeped green. The doors slid open. The ride to the top floor took 30 seconds. When the doors opened, I stepped into a world of silence and luxury. The penthouse was expansive with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the entire city of Atlanta. The lights of the skyline twinkled below me, a sea of gold and white in the darkness. I walked to the window and pressed my hand against the cool glass. Below me, somewhere in the chaotic traffic, my mother and Brad were probably driving back to a house they couldn't afford, plotting their next move. They thought they had stripped me of my home. They thought they had left me vulnerable. But as I looked out over the city that I now commanded, I didn't feel vulnerable. I felt dangerous. I looked down at the wine stain on my chest one last time. It wasn't a mark of shame, it was a baptism. The daughter who sought approval was dead. The CEO had just been born. I unzipped the ruined blouse and let it fall to the floor. I walked into the massive bathroom, turned on the shower, and watched the steam rise. "Let them come," I whispered to the empty room. "Let them try to take this from me." I stared at my reflection in the mirror. My eyes were dry. My hands were steady. The war had begun, and unlike my mother, I wasn't fighting for survival. I was fighting for conquest. The sun rose over Atlanta with a brilliance that felt mocking, but inside the executive boardroom of the Onyx Hotel, the air was cold enough to freeze breath. I had not slept more than 2 hours, but adrenaline is a potent fuel. I sat at the head of the massive obsidian conference table, the seat my grandmother had occupied for 40 years. To my right sat the empty chair where Marcus, our chief operating officer, usually sat. To my left were the terrified faces of the department heads, people I had worked alongside for a decade, but who now looked at me with a mixture of awe and uncertainty. I checked my watch. It was 8 o'clock sharp. The heavy double doors opened and Marcus strolled in. He was holding a latte in one hand and his phone in the other, 5 minutes late, wearing the arrogance of a man who thought he had picked the winning side. Marcus was a man my grandmother had hired, but over the last 6 months I had watched him take long lunches with Brad. I had seen the way they laughed together, the way Marcus would nod along when Brad made subtle, undermining jokes about female leadership. "Good morning, Sophia," Marcus said, not even bothering to look up from his phone as he pulled out his chair. "Or should I say, Madam Owner, I heard about the little drama at dinner last night. Brad told me you are feeling a bit overwhelmed. Don't worry, we can go over the transition plan later. Brad has some great ideas about restructuring the debt." I didn't say a word. I simply slid a single sheet of paper across the polished black table. It stopped perfectly in front of him. Marcus frowned, setting down his coffee. "What is this?" "Your termination notice," I said, my voice cutting through the silent room like a razor. Marcus laughed, a short barking sound of disbelief. "Excuse me, you can't fire me, Sophia. I have a contract, and besides, your mother and Brad are—" "My mother and Brad are trespassers," I interrupted, leaning forward. "And you, Marcus, are a corporate spy. I know about the emails. I know you forwarded the Q3 financial reports and our confidential client list to Brad's personal Gmail account 3 days ago. That is a violation of your non-disclosure agreement and a breach of fiduciary duty. You are lucky I am only firing you and not suing you for corporate espionage." Marcus's face went from smug to purple in the span of 3 seconds. He stood up, slamming his hand on the table. "You are making a huge mistake. You are just a girl with a daddy complex acting out. You need me. This hotel will collapse without me." "Security," I said into the intercom on the table. 2 uniformed officers stepped in from the hallway. "Escort Mr. Daniels to the curb," I ordered, not breaking eye contact with him. "He is not permitted to return to his office. His personal effects will be mailed to him." As Marcus was dragged out shouting threats about how Brad would fix this, the rest of the room sat in stunned silence. I looked around the table. "Does anyone else have confusion about who signs the paychecks in this building?" I asked softly. Heads shook rapidly. "No, ma'am." "Good. Then let's get to work." But the peace didn't last long. 2 hours later, the intercom on my desk buzzed. It was Sarah, the head receptionist in the lobby. Her voice was trembling so hard, I could barely understand her. "Ms. Sophia, please, you need to come down. They are here. They are screaming at me." I didn't need to ask who they were. I checked the security feed on my monitor. There, in the center of my pristine, marble-floored lobby, was a circus. Brad was pounding his fist on the front desk, his face red and distorted. Clarissa was standing next to him wearing large sunglasses indoors and gesturing wildly to a group of confused tourists playing the victim for an audience that didn't care. I felt a surge of cold anger. They were disrupting my business. They were scaring my staff. This was not a family dispute anymore. This was an invasion. I stood up and smoothed my skirt. I walked out of my office, but I didn't go to the elevator. I went to the mezzanine balcony that overlooked the lobby. I wanted to see them, but I refused to descend to their level. Not today. From my vantage point, the acoustics carried their voices perfectly. "Do you know who I am?" Brad bellowed at poor Sarah, who looked like she was about to cry. "I am the father of the owner. I am the president of operations. Give me the master keycard right now. I need to get into the executive suite. My daughter is having a mental breakdown and I need to take control before she ruins this business." Clarissa chimed in, her voice shrill. "Call her down here. Tell her that her mother is here and I will not be ignored. This is my mother's hotel. I have rights." The guests were staring. People were pulling out their phones to record. This was exactly what Brad wanted. He wanted a scene. He wanted to embarrass me into submission. He thought if he made enough noise, I would come down and pay him off just to make him stop. He was wrong. I pulled out my walkie-talkie. "Tyrell, are you on the floor?" Tyrell was my head of security. He was a 6'4" former Marine who spoke very little and smiled even less. He had been with Grandma Hattie for 20 years. To him, the hotel was sacred ground. "Copy that, Ms. Sophia. I have eyes on the subjects." "Remove them," I said. With extreme prejudice, Tyrell asked, his deep voice crackling with suppressed anticipation. "They are trespassing, Tyrell. Treat them like any other unruly patron who threatens the staff. If they resist, call the police." I watched from the balcony as Tyrell and 3 of his largest officers emerged from the shadows. They moved with the synchronized precision of a tactical unit. Tyrell approached the reception desk just as Brad raised his hand as if he were going to grab Sarah's arm. "Sir," Tyrell said, his voice booming like thunder, startling Brad into taking a step back. "Step away from the desk." Brad spun around, trying to regain his composure. "Oh, finally some security. Listen, big guy, this receptionist is incompetent. I need you to escort me to the penthouse. I am Brad Miller. You are trespassing on private property," Tyrell interrupted, stepping into Brad's personal space. "You have been asked to leave. You have 10 seconds to exit the building voluntarily, or I will assist you." Brad laughed, a nervous, incredulous sound. "You can't touch me." "I am family," Clarissa tell him. Clarissa stepped forward, pulling down her sunglasses. "Do not. You speak to my husband that way. Do you know who we are? We will have your job, Sophia. Sophia, come out here." I stepped up to the railing of the mezzanine. My silhouette was clearly visible against the light from the atrium windows. Brad looked up and saw me. "There she is," he shouted, pointing a shaking finger at me. "Sophia, tell this gorilla to stand down." I looked down at them. I didn't shout. I didn't wave. I simply looked at Tyrell and gave a single sharp nod. That was all the permission he needed. "Time is up," Tyrell said. He reached out and grabbed Brad by the back of his expensive, ill-fitting suit jacket. Brad yelped a high-pitched sound that was entirely undignified. Another guard stepped in and grabbed Brad's other arm. They lifted him off his feet as if he weighed nothing. "Hey, let me go! This is assault! I will sue you! I will sue this whole place!" Brad screamed, kicking his legs in the air like a toddler having a tantrum. Clarissa screamed, rushing after them. "Stop it! Let him go! You are hurting him!" 2 other guards stepped in front of Clarissa, blocking her path effectively, but gently. Ma'am, please follow your husband to the exit, the officer said firmly. I watched as my stepfather, the man who had called me a bean counter, the man who had tried to steal my legacy, was dragged across the lobby floor. His heels skidded on the polished marble. The tourists were laughing now. The staff was watching with wide eyes, a mixture of shock and vindication on their faces. They reached the revolving doors. Tyrell didn't bother with the mechanism. He pushed the emergency side door open and practically threw Brad onto the sidewalk. Brad stumbled and fell onto his hands and knees on the concrete. Clarissa ran out after him, almost tripping in her heels, her screams for justice fading as the heavy glass doors swung shut. Tyrell dusted off his hands and looked up at the balcony. He gave me a crisp salute. I nodded back, turning away from the railing. My heart was pounding not with fear, but with the intoxicating rush of power. I had drawn a line in the sand and I had defended it. I walked back into my office and pressed the intercom button. Sarah. Yes, Ms. Sophia. Her voice was still shaky, but lighter. You handled that perfectly, I said. Take the rest of the day off, paid, and tell the staff that from now on, Brad Miller and Clarissa Miller are on the blacklist. Their photos go to every security station. If they set foot on the curb, the police are to be called immediately. Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Ms. Sophia. I sat down in my grandmother's chair and swiveled to look out the window. Below, I could see two tiny figures on the sidewalk arguing with each other, looking up at the towering building they had just been expelled from. This was only the first battle. I knew Brad. He was desperate, and desperate men are dangerous. He wouldn't stop at a lobby tantrum. He would go lower. He would go for my reputation. Let him try, I whispered. I pulled the blue folder toward me and opened it. I had work to do. An empire doesn't run itself, and I had a lot of cleaning up to do before I could rest. Peace in my empire lasted exactly 3 hours. I was in the middle of reviewing the quarterly marketing budget when my phone buzzed against the mahogany desk. It was not a call. It was a notification from our social media manager, a young woman named Chloe who usually only messaged me when we went viral for something good, like a celebrity sighting in the lobby. This time her message consisted of 2 words. Watch this. I clicked the link. It opened TikTok. The face that filled my screen was familiar, but the expression was one I had never seen in real life. It was my sister, Tanisha. She was sitting on the floor of her bedroom, the ring light reflecting in her tear-filled eyes. She was wearing a hoodie that looked intentionally oversized to make her appear smaller, more vulnerable. The caption read, "The truth about my family." Hey guys, Tanisha whispered into the camera, wiping away a tear that I knew she had practiced in the mirror for 20 minutes. I did not want to do this. I really didn't. But I can't stay silent anymore. You guys see the glitz and the glamour of my family's hotel, but you don't see the abuse that happens behind closed doors. My stomach turned. I watched as my own sister, the girl whose tuition I had paid for, the girl whose car insurance was on autopay from my account, looked directly into the lens and lied. My sister Sophia, the new CEO, Tanisha continued, her voice breaking dramatically. She kicked me and my mom out on the street last night. Literally. My mom is 55 years old, you guys. She has high blood pressure, and Sophia just threw her out because she wanted full control of the money. She even pushed my mom. I saw it. And the worst part is what she did to my grandma. I leaned forward, gripping the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. My grandma has dementia, Tanisha sobbed. She doesn't know what she is signing. Sophia forced her to sign over the hotel. She manipulated a sick old woman just to cut us out. We are terrified for my grandma's safety. Please, if you are watching this, help us. We just want our grandma back. The video ended. I looked at the engagement numbers, 2 million views, 300,000 likes. The comments were a cesspool of hatred. People were calling for my arrest. They were calling for a boycott of the Onyx. They were calling me a monster, an abuser, a thief. Justice for Grandma was already trending. I set the phone down. The office was silent, but I could feel the walls closing in. This was not just a family spat anymore. This was a calculated assassination of my character. Tanisha knew exactly what she was doing. She knew that in the court of public opinion, the first person to cry is usually the winner. The intercom buzzed. It was Chloe again. Her voice was panic-stricken. "Ms. Sophia, the phones are lighting up. We have had 15 cancellations for the wedding venue in the last hour. The bridal forum on Reddit is blowing up. They are saying they don't want to support an elder abuser. And stock prices for Hattie's Heritage are down 4% in pre-market trading." I took a deep breath. My instinct was to scream. My instinct was to go live on my own account and scream the truth to show the receipts to drag Tanisha by her hair metaphorically. But I stopped myself. That is what they wanted. They wanted a mud fight. They wanted me to look defensive. "Tell the PR team to draft a holding statement," I said calmly. "Something generic. We are aware of the allegations and are handling this private family matter with the authorities. Do not engage with the comments. Do not delete them either. Let them scream." "But Ms. Sophia," Chloe stammered. "They are ruining us." "Silence, Chloe," I said firmly. "Silence is an answer. Just hold the line." I hung up. I did not call a lawyer. Not yet. I called someone far more dangerous. I dialed a number I had saved simply as Vance. Vance was a private investigator who used to work for the IRS. He could find a penny in a chaotic ocean. He answered on the first ring. "I saw the video," Vance said. His voice was gravel. "Do you want me to find out if she bought those tears on Amazon?" "I want you to dig Vance," I said, staring out at the city skyline. "Tanisha is playing the poor destitute victim. She claims I cut them off and they are struggling. But I know my sister, she cannot go 24 hours without spending money. I want her financial records. I want to know where every dollar she has spent in the last 6 months came from. And Vance, check my mother's credit cards, the ones she thinks only she has access to." "Give me an hour," Vance said. The next 60 minutes were the longest of my life. I watched the cancellation emails roll in. I watched the hate comments multiply. It felt like I was watching my grandmother's legacy burn down, sparked by the match of a jealous sibling. I questioned myself. Should I have let them stay? Was I too harsh? Then the email from Vance arrived. Subject: The hypocrisy of Tanisha Miller. I opened the attachment. It was a detailed credit card statement. And there it was, the smoking gun. While Tanisha was online crying about her mother being abused and destitute, the records showed a very different story. The timestamp on the transactions was damning. 3 days ago, Tanisha had used Clarissa's Platinum Visa to book a VIP table at a club in Miami for next weekend. 2 days ago, she had charged a $4,000 handbag to the same card. And just this morning, 2 hours before she posted the video claiming they were homeless and starving, there was a charge for $300 at a luxury spa in Buckhead. But the kicker was the user log. Tanisha had set up the Uber Eats account on her phone, using Clarissa's credit card, but she had changed the delivery address to her boyfriend's apartment. She was literally stealing food out of her mother's mouth while accusing me of starving them. I scrolled further down. Vance had found her private Instagram, the one she used for close friends. There was a photo from yesterday. Tanisha was holding a bottle of champagne, winking at the camera. The caption read, "About to secure the bag. Acting classes finally paying off." A cold smile spread across my face. They wanted a narrative, I had the truth. Tanisha had made a fatal error. She had assumed that because she was loud, she was right. She forgot that I was the one who paid the bills, which meant I was the one who could see the receipts. I didn't post the evidence, not yet. I printed the documents and placed them in a folder next to the deed. Tanisha had started a fire thinking it would burn me. She didn't realize she was standing in a room full of gasoline and I was the one holding the extinguisher. I picked up the phone and called Chloe back. "Ms. Sophia?" she asked, sounding terrified. "Chloe," I said, my voice light and dangerous. "Don't worry about the cancellations. We will fill those spots and get the legal team ready. We are not going to sue for defamation. We are going to sue for fraud. And we are going to do it publicly." I looked at the freeze frame of Tanisha's fake tears on my screen. You want to be famous, little sister, I whispered. I am about to make you infamous. The campaign of destruction they had launched was powerful, but they had made one critical miscalculation. They assumed I would play by the rules of family. They forgot that when you come for the crown, you are no longer family. You are the opposition, and I never lose to the opposition. The smoking gun arrived on my desk at midnight in a plain manila envelope. Vance, my private investigator, did not trust email with this level of radioactive material. He sat across from me, his fedora resting on his knee, his face grim. "You are not going to like this, Sophia," he said, "but you need to see it." I opened the file. The first page was a mugshot. It was younger, leaner, but unmistakably Brad. The eyes held that same arrogant glint, even while staring into a police camera. The charge was wire fraud and insurance scams. He had served 2 years in a federal penitentiary in Florida under the name Bradley Miller Smith. He had dropped the Smith when he moved to Atlanta to reinvent himself. But the prison record was the least of my worries. I flipped to the financial summary, and my breath hitched in my throat. Brad was not just broke. He was drowning. He owed $2.3 million to a private lending syndicate based in Macau. These were not banks. These were people who broke kneecaps for late fees. The report detailed his desperate scrambling over the last 6 months. He had taken out 3 mortgages on my mother's house. He had maxed out every credit card in her name. And most terrifying of all, there was a text message log Vance had intercepted. It was from an unknown number. The message read, "You have 30 days, Miller. Sell the hotel, or we take the wife as collateral." My blood ran cold. He wasn't just trying to steal the hotel for greed. He was trying to steal it to save his own life, and he was using my mother as a human shield. If he didn't pay up, they weren't coming for him. They were coming for Clarissa. I sat there in the silence of my office, the city lights of Atlanta blurring behind me. I hated my mother for what she had done to me. I hated how she had chosen him over me. But she was still my mother, and she was in mortal danger. "I have to tell her," I whispered. Vance nodded slowly. "She won't believe you, Sophia. Victims of con men this good never do until the handcuffs go on." "I have to try," I said. The next morning I texted Clarissa. I didn't ask. I commanded, "Meet me at the Golden Bean on 4th Street in 20 minutes. It concerns your safety. Come alone. If you bring Brad, I leave." She was there when I arrived. She sat in the back corner wearing oversized sunglasses and a silk scarf, trying to look like the wealthy matriarch she pretended to be. But up close I could see the cracks. Her foundation was caked over dark circles. Her hands trembled as she held her coffee cup. She looked exhausted, a woman carrying the weight of a lie she was terrified to drop. I sat down opposite her. I didn't order anything. I placed the file on the table between us. "Make this quick, Sophia," she snapped, though her voice lacked its usual venom. "Brad thinks I am at the dentist. If he knew I was seeing you after what you did to Tanisha online." I pushed the file toward her. "Read it, Mom." She looked at the folder with disdain. "What is this? More lies, more fake news from your little PR team." "It is his criminal record, Mom," I said softly. "And his debt ledger. Brad isn't a real estate tycoon. He is a felon. He owes over $2 million to loan sharks. He mortgaged your house 3 times. You don't own that house anymore, Mom. The bank does. And if he doesn't sell my hotel in 30 days, the people he owes money to are coming for you." Clarissa froze. For a second, just a split second, I saw the fear in her eyes. I saw the realization trying to break through the wall of denial she had built. She knew money was missing. She knew he was secretive. Deep down she knew. But then the wall went back up. Harder. Stronger. She laughed. A shrill, brittle sound that drew stares from the other tables. "You are pathetic, Sophia. You really are. You went to all this trouble to forge documents just to break us up. You are so jealous that I finally found a man who treats me like a queen. He is not treating you like a queen, Mom." I kept my voice low but intense. "He is treating you like a piggy bank. Look at the mug shot. Look at the dates. He was in prison when he told you he was building resorts in the Caribbean. I don't want to see it, Clarissa screamed. She grabbed the file. She didn't open it. She didn't check the facts. She ripped it in half. Then she ripped it again. She tore the proof of her husband's treachery into confetti and threw it onto the floor of the coffee shop. He loves me, she hissed, her face contorted with rage. And he is going to make us billions. You are just trying to scare me because you know he is winning. You know he is going to take that hotel from you legally. Mom, please, I pleaded, reaching across the table. He is using you. He is going to get you killed. She stood up, shaking with fury. She raised her hand. It was the same motion as the night at the restaurant, the same reflex to punish the daughter who dared to speak the truth. Her palm swung toward my face, aiming for a slap that would silence me. But I was not the same woman I was 3 days ago. My hand shot up. I caught her wrist mid-air. The impact was sharp bone against bone. I held her arm firm, stopping her hand inches from my cheek. I squeezed just enough to let her know I was strong, just enough to let her know the days of physical intimidation were over. I looked into her eyes. I saw shock. I saw confusion. She tried to pull her hand back, but I held on for a second longer. Do not, I whispered, my voice cold as ice. Do not ever raise your hand to me again. I am not your punching bag, and I am not your child anymore. I am the woman trying to save your life. I released her wrist. She stumbled back, clutching her arm as if I had burned her. She looked at me with pure hatred. You are the devil, she spat. You are no daughter of mine. Brad was right about you. You are toxic. She grabbed her purse, her breathing ragged. We are going to sue you, Sophia, she threatened, backing away toward the door. Brad has a lawyer, a real shark. We are going to prove Grandma is incompetent. We are going to take the hotel, the accounts, everything. And when you are on the street with nothing, do not come crying to me. She turned and fled the coffee shop, leaving a trail of torn paper on the floor behind her. I sat there for a long time, staring at the shredded mugshot of Brad Miller. One piece showed his smiling mouth. Another showed his cold eyes. My mother had just signed her own death warrant, and she was so blinded by her desperate need for validation that she thanked the executioner. I signaled the waitress and asked for a broom. I knelt down in my designer suit and helped sweep up the mess my mother had made. As I gathered the scraps of paper, my sadness hardened into something else, something sharp and heavy. I had tried peace. I had tried reason. I had tried to be the good daughter. Now I picked up my phone and dialed Vance. She didn't take the bait, I said. I figured Vance replied. What is the next move? Execute the nuclear option, I said, walking out of the shop into the blinding Atlanta sun. Send the file to his parole officer, and Vance, find out which judge is presiding over their competency hearing for Grandma. I have a feeling Brad is going to try to buy him off, and I want to be there when the money changes hands. My mother wanted a court battle, fine. She was about to find out that while she was playing house with a criminal, I was building a fortress, and I had just locked the gates. The man in the cheap polyester suit who walked into my office 3 hours later did not look like a threat. He looked like a bored messenger chewing gum and checking his watch. But the envelope he slapped onto my desk was not a message. It was a bomb. You have been served, Ms. Miller, he mumbled, not even making eye contact before turning to leave. I picked up the thick packet of documents. The seal of the Fulton County Superior Court glared back at me. My hands, usually steady enough to sign multi-million-dollar contracts, without a tremor, shook slightly as I turned the first page. The bold, capitalized words at the top of the motion made the air leave my lungs. Emergency ex parte petition for temporary conservatorship. I scanned the names. Petitioners Clarissa Miller and Bradley Miller. Subject Hattie Mae Robinson. I forced myself to breathe, forcing my brain to switch from daughter mode to CEO mode. A conservatorship. It was the nuclear option. It was the legal weapon used to strip a person of their autonomy, their rights, and their control over their own life. It was what they did to people who were comatose or severely mentally incapacitated. I flipped to the second page and my blood turned to ice. The basis of their petition was a sworn affidavit from a man named Dr. Eris Thorne. I had never heard of him. My grandmother had been seeing the same geriatric specialist at Emory Hospital for 15 years. But according to this document, Dr. Thorne had examined Grandma Hattie 2 days ago. The words on the page were a work of fiction so dark it made me nauseous. Advanced Alzheimer's disease, rapid cognitive decline, paranoid delusions, inability to manage financial affairs or recognize immediate family members. I slammed the paper down on the desk. This was a lie. A blatant, criminal lie. Grandma Hattie was sharper than me. She finished the New York Times crossword puzzle in pen every morning. She could recite the revenue per available room for the last 5 fiscal years from memory. Just 2 nights ago, she had handed me the deed with eyes that were clear and focused. But the lie was stamped, signed, and notarized. Brad had found a doctor willing to sell his soul for a payout. A dirty doctor, who had likely never even been in the same room as my grandmother, had signed a death warrant for her freedom. The phone on my desk rang, jarring me from my shock. It was David, my chief financial officer. David was a man of few words, a stoic accountant who had seen us through recessions and market crashes without blinking. But when he spoke now, his voice was high and tight with panic. "Sophia, you need to log into the corporate banking portal. Now." "What is it, David?" I asked, typing my password with trembling fingers. "The transfers," he stammered. I tried to process the vendor payments for the food suppliers. They bounced, all of them. I hit enter. The screen loaded. My eyes went to the operating account, the one that held the liquidity for our daily expenses. The balance was 0. I checked the payroll account. 0. I checked the reserve account. 0. At the top of the screen, a red banner flashed. "Account frozen by court order. Case number 24, CV 908. "David," I whispered, staring at the screen in horror. "They froze everything." "It is an emergency injunction, Sophia," David said, his voice cracking. "The bank received the conservatorship filing. Because Brad and your mother claim that the transfer of the hotel to you was done by a mentally incompetent person, the court has put a temporary hold on all assets associated with the Hattie's Heritage brand until a hearing can be held." "When is the hearing?" I asked. David paused. "Monday. But Sophia, today is Wednesday. Payroll is due on Friday." The silence that stretched between us was heavy enough to crush bones. Payroll. We had 400 employees, housekeepers who supported families, chefs who worked double shifts, valets who relied on tips but needed their base pay to cover rent. If checks didn't clear on Friday, the trust I had built with them over a decade would evaporate. "If we miss payroll," David said softly, speaking the nightmare out loud, "the union will strike. The staff will walk out. The hotel stops functioning. And if the hotel stops functioning, the value plummets." I finished for him. "And Brad can argue to the judge that I am incompetent, that under my leadership the business failed in less than a week. He wasn't just trying to steal the money. He was trying to burn the house down with me inside it so he could buy the ashes at a discount." I hung up the phone. I stood up and walked to the door of my office. I needed to see my people. I needed to feel the pulse of the building I was fighting for. I walked out into the corridor and took the service elevator down to the housekeeping department. Usually this area was filled with laughter and the hum of industrial washing machines. Today it was quiet. I turned the corner and saw a group of maids huddled together by the linen closet. They stopped talking as soon as they saw me. Their eyes didn't hold the usual warmth. They held fear. Ms. Sophia, one of them, a woman named Elena, who had known me since I was a child, stepped forward. She was wringing her hands in her apron. "Is it true?" "Is what true?" "Elena," I asked, keeping my voice steady despite the chaos in my mind. "My nephew works in accounting," she said, lowering her voice. "He says the accounts are locked. He says he says there might not be checks on Friday." I looked at the faces around her. Young mothers, grandmothers, women who worked hard for every dollar. They were terrified. They didn't care about corporate power struggles. They cared about groceries and electricity bills. I felt a wave of shame wash over me, hot and suffocating. This was my family's mess, and it was spilling onto innocent people. I took a step forward. Elena, listen to me. I don't want to lie to them. I couldn't promise them the money was there because at this exact second, it wasn't. There is a legal dispute, I said, choosing my words carefully. My stepfather is trying to hurt me, but I promise you, on my life you will get paid. I will sell my car if I have to. I will liquidate my own personal savings. No one in this room goes without. Elena nodded, but the fear didn't leave her eyes. Promises didn't pay the rent. I walked back to the elevator, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. I was cornered. My mother and Brad had played a masterstroke. They used the legal system, a system designed to protect the vulnerable, to weaponize my grandmother's age against us. I went back to the penthouse, feeling the walls closing in. I tried to call Grandma's cell phone. It went straight to voicemail. I tried the landline at her house. No answer. Brad had isolated her. He had probably moved her to a secure facility or disconnected her lines under the guise of her medical condition. I was cut off from my money, cut off from my greatest ally, and facing a mutiny from my staff. I walked to the window, looking down at the city that suddenly felt like a prison. I had the deed in my safe, but a deed is just paper if a judge says the person who signed it didn't know what they were doing. My phone buzzed again. It was a text from an unknown number. I opened it. It was a photo. It was a picture of my mother, Clarissa, standing in front of a brand new Porsche Cayenne at a dealership. She was smiling, holding a set of keys. The caption below the photo read, "Thanks for the advance, Brad. Celebration time." He had bought her off. He had used money he borrowed from loan sharks to buy my mother a car she couldn't afford, effectively purchasing her loyalty and her signature on the conservatorship papers. I threw the phone across the room. It hit the sofa and bounced onto the rug. They thought they had me. They thought that by freezing the money they froze me. They thought that by isolating Grandma they silenced her. But they forgot one thing. I wasn't just Hattie's granddaughter. I was Sophia. And I didn't need a bank account to fight dirty. I walked over and picked up the phone. I dialed the only number left to call. Not a lawyer, not a banker. I called the union representative for the hotel workers. "Hello, Mr. Henderson," I said, my voice cold and hard. "This is Sophia. We need to talk. I have a proposal. If the courts want to freeze the money, fine, but I control the labor, and without labor there is no hotel for Brad to steal." I was about to shut down my own empire to save it. The temporary truce with the union leader had bought me 48 hours, but I knew it was a bandage on a bullet wound. I walked back to the executive suite, my heels clicking rhythmically against the floor, trying to project a confidence I no longer felt. I needed to see Robert, my head of accounting. Robert was not just an employee. He was the man who had taught me how to read a balance sheet when I was 22. He had been at my graduation. He was the one person besides Grandma who knew where every skeleton in the company closet was buried. I reached his office door and pushed it open, expecting to see him buried behind stacks of invoices, his reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. The room was empty. It wasn't just empty of people, it was stripped. The family photos that usually lined his windowsill were gone. The ergonomic chair he loved was pushed neatly under the desk. And on the center of the mahogany surface where his computer tower usually sat, there was nothing but a layer of dust and a single white envelope. My stomach dropped through the floor. I walked over and picked up the envelope. It had my name on it, written in his familiar, shaky handwriting. I ripped it open. Inside was a resignation letter, effective immediately, and below his signature was a handwritten note that shattered my heart. "I am sorry, Sophia. Brad offered to pay off my mortgage and cover my wife's medical bills. I have to choose my family over yours." I looked at the empty space where the hard drive had been. Robert hadn't just quit. He had taken the backup servers. He had taken the vendor lists, the tax records, the private donor files, and the strategic forecast for the next 10 years. He had handed the entire nervous system of Hattie's heritage over to a man who would sell it for parts. I didn't scream. I couldn't. The betrayal was so precise, so surgical that it left me breathless. Brad was not playing a game of checkers. He was playing chess, and he was taking my pieces off the board one by one. I ran out of the office. I needed to get to the one person who could stop this. I needed Grandma. If she could make a video statement, if she could just show her face to the public and prove she was sane, this entire house of cards Brad was building would collapse. I drove to her estate in Buckhead faster than I should have, weaving through the evening traffic. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight my fingers ached. The sun was setting, casting long, bruised shadows across the road. When I pulled up to the wrought iron gates of her home, my heart stopped. The heavy chain that usually secured the gate was gone. The front door of the mansion, which was always locked and alarmed, was standing slightly ajar. "Grandma," I screamed, pushing the door open and running into the foyer. The house was dark. The air was stale, stripped of the scent of lavender and old paper that always clung to her. Grandma Hattie. I ran to her bedroom on the ground floor. The bed was made, the sheets pulled tight, hospital corners perfect. But the bedside table was empty. Her reading glasses were gone. Her Bible was gone. The array of medications she took for her blood pressure and arthritis was missing. I ran to the kitchen. Nothing. I ran to the sunroom. Empty. She was gone. It was as if she had been erased. I ran back out to the driveway, panic rising in my throat like bile. I saw Mrs. Higgins, the neighbor who lived across the street, walking her dog. I sprinted over to her. "Mrs. Higgins!" I gasped. "Where is she? Where is my grandmother?" Mrs. Higgins looked at me with pity in her eyes. "Oh, Sophia, you just missed them." "Them? Who is them?" "Your stepfather. The man with the loud suits, and your mother. They came about 3 hours ago with a private ambulance. A van with tinted windows." "An ambulance? Was she sick? Did something happen?" Mrs. Higgins shook her head. "No, dear. She walked out on her own 2 feet, although she looked very angry. Your mother was holding her arm tight. I heard your stepfather tell the driver they were taking her to a specialized memory care facility for her own protection. He said she was a danger to herself. Did they say where I pleaded, grabbing Mrs. Higgins' hands? Please, did you hear a name?" She shook her head sadly. "I am sorry, honey. I didn't hear." "But your mother? She looked right at me and told me not to tell you. She said you were the reason Hattie was stressed." I let go of her hands. I felt the ground swaying beneath me. They had kidnapped her. Legally, under the guise of an emergency medical intervention, they had taken a brilliant, healthy woman and locked her away in a facility where they could drug her into silence. Without her testimony, the conservatorship would stand. Without her testimony, I was just a greedy granddaughter fighting a grieving daughter. I got back into my car, but I didn't turn it on. I just sat there in the dark driveway of the home where I had learned to walk, where I had learned to read, where I had learned to lead. Now, it was just a shell. I drove back to the hotel on autopilot. When I reached the penthouse, I didn't turn on the lights. I couldn't bear to see the luxury, the empire that was crumbling in my hands. I sat down on the floor in the middle of the living room, leaning my back against the cold glass of the window. Below me, Atlanta was a sea of lights, millions of people living their lives unaware that high above them a war was being lost. I pulled my knees to my chest. For the first time since my birthday dinner, the tears came. Not the angry tears of a fighter, but the hot, heavy tears of a child who realizes the monsters are real. I had no money. My accounts were zeroed out. My staff was terrified. My trusted accountant had sold me out. My mother had betrayed me. And now the only person in the world who loved me unconditionally was locked in a padded room somewhere, probably calling my name. I looked at the phone lying on the rug next to me. It was silent. No lawyers were calling with good news. No investors were calling with bailouts. I was radioactive. "I am going to lose," I whispered to the empty room. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Brad had won. He had outmaneuvered me. He had used my own family against me. I should just pack a bag. I should just leave the keys on the desk and disappear. Let them have it. Let them run it into the ground. At least I would be free. I closed my eyes, letting the exhaustion wash over me. I was done. I was broken. But then, in the silence of the room, a sound cut through the darkness. It wasn't the phone. It wasn't the intercom. It was a small, rhythmic beeping sound, coming from the pocket of the blazer I had thrown on the chair. I opened my eyes. I wiped my face. I crawled over to the chair and reached into the pocket. My fingers brushed against the leather of the Hermes bag I had bought for Tanisha. No, that wasn't it. I had given that to her. Wait. I remembered something. When I had bought the bag for Tanisha, I had bought two, one for her and a smaller clutch for myself to match. And inside that clutch, I had kept a burner phone. A backup. A lifeline. Grandma had insisted I keep years ago for international travel, but the beeping wasn't coming from a phone. It was coming from an app notification on the burner phone I had synced with the tracker. I unlocked the screen. The tracking app was open. A single red dot was pulsing on the map. I stared at it, my brain slowly catching up to reality. When I had met Tanisha to give her the bag, I hadn't just given her leather and gold. I had sewn an AirTag into the lining. I had done it to track where she went, so I could find out where she was spending money. But Tanisha wasn't moving. The dot was stationary. I zoomed in on the map. The location wasn't a mall. It wasn't a club. It wasn't her apartment. The red dot was pulsing at an address deep in the woods of North Georgia, 40 miles outside the city. It was labeled Oakwood Sanitarium. And then I remembered what Tanisha had said in her video. We just want our grandma back. If Tanisha was visiting grandma and she had her bag, I stood up. The tears dried on my face. The exhaustion vanished, replaced by a cold, hard current of electricity. I wasn't alone. I wasn't broke. I had a location. I looked at my reflection in the dark window. The scared little girl was gone. The CEO was back. And she was going to war. The tears I had shed in the darkness of my office did not last long, because tears do not sign paychecks. And they certainly do not defeat narcissists. I stood up and walked to the bathroom attached to the executive suite. I splashed cold water on my face, watching the red puffiness around my eyes fade. I applied a fresh coat of lipstick, a shade of dark crimson that felt like armor. I looked at myself in the mirror and realized that fighting fair was a luxury I could no longer afford. My mother and Brad had fought dirty. They had kidnapped my grandmother. They had frozen my assets. So it was time for me to stop being the ethical CEO and start being the sister who knew exactly where the bodies were buried. I knew Tanisha better than anyone. I knew that despite her bravado on social media, she was deeply insecure. She didn't want responsibility. She didn't want to run a hotel. She wanted the lifestyle that came with it. She wanted the clothes, the cars, and the envy of strangers. And most of all, she wanted to be chosen. She had spent her whole life feeling like the runner-up to my success. If I wanted to break her, I didn't need to threaten her. I needed to validate her. I picked up my personal cell phone, the one they hadn't managed to disconnect yet. I typed a text message. I deleted it. I typed another. It had to be perfect. It had to sound defeated. Tanisha, you win. The accounts are frozen. The staff is revolting. I can't do this anymore. I am ready to sign over my shares, but I will not give them to Brad. I will only give them to you. Come to the penthouse. I have something for you. Come alone. I hit send. Then I waited. It took exactly 3 minutes for the reply to come through. On my way. I set the stage. I dimmed the lights in the penthouse living room. I went to the safe and pulled out the orange box. It was the holy grail of fashion. A Hermes Birkin bag, size 30 in black togo leather with gold hardware. I had bought it 2 years ago as an investment piece, never worn. But tonight, it wasn't an accessory. It was a Trojan horse. Earlier that day, before everything fell apart, I had visited Vance. He had given me a small flat device no thicker than a credit card. It was a high-powered listening bug with GPS capability. I had slipped it carefully behind the interior lining of the bag, stitching the leather back up with a needle and thread I kept in my emergency kit. It was invisible. I placed the orange box on the coffee table. Next to it, I placed a bottle of Dom Perignon and 2 crystal flutes. The elevator chimed 40 minutes later. Tanisha walked in. She was wearing sunglasses at night, trying to look like a celebrity dodging paparazzi, even though the only person taking her picture was herself. She looked around the penthouse with hungry eyes, assessing the furniture, the art, the view. "Took you long enough to come to your senses," she said, dropping her keys on the console table. I stayed seated on the sofa, keeping my posture slumped, my shoulders rounded. I needed to look beaten. "I am tired, Tanisha," I said, keeping my voice low. "You were right. Mom was right. I am just an accountant. I don't know how to handle the pressure. The union, the lawsuits, the press. It is too much." Tanisha smirked, walking over to the window. "I told you. Heavy is the head that wears the crown, Sophia. You always thought you were smarter than us, but look at you now. Alone in a big glass box." I swallowed the urge to scream at her. Instead, I gestured to the table. "I want you to have this," I said. "As a peace offering. If you are going to be the face of the brand, you need to look the part." Tanisha turned. Her eyes landed on the orange box. The smirk vanished, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated greed. She rushed over to the table, her hands trembling slightly as she lifted the lid. She pulled back the tissue paper and gasped. The smell of fresh, expensive leather filled the room. Is this real?" she whispered, lifting the bag out as if it were a newborn baby. "It is yours," I said. "Consider it a down payment on your future." She slipped the bag over her arm, posing in the reflection of the window. "Oh my God. Sophia, this is stunning. Finally, finally you are treating me with some respect." "Sit down," I said, reaching for the champagne. "Let's drink to it, to the new owner of Hattie's heritage." Tanisha sat down, placing the bag on her lap, stroking the leather. I poured the champagne, filling her glass to the brim. She took a long sip, her eyes closing in satisfaction. I watched her, counting the seconds. Alcohol and flattery were a dangerous combination for someone with an ego as fragile as hers. So I asked, taking a tiny sip of my own, "What is the plan? Once I sign the papers, what are you and Brad going to do?" Tanisha laughed, the sound sharp and reckless. "Oh, Brad has big plans. We are going to rebrand, make it younger, sexier, get rid of all that stuffy old history Grandma loved so much. And we are going to sell the downtown location. Brad says the land is worth more than the hotel. We are going to cash out and buy a villa in Turks and Caicos." My heart hammered against my ribs. They were going to dismantle everything. "And what about Grandma?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Won't she be upset?" Tanisha waved her hand dismissively, taking another large gulp of champagne. "Grandma won't know the difference. Brad took care of it." My grip tightened on the stem of my glass. "Took care of it how? Is she okay?" "She is fine, Sophia. God, stop worrying. Brad is a genius, honestly. He found this place that is super secure. No phones, no visitors, no interference. It is perfect. She can just sit there and be old, and we can finally live our lives without her judging us." I needed a name. I needed a location. "But where, Tanisha?" I asked, pouring more champagne into her glass. "I just want to send her flowers. You know how she loves lilies." Tanisha giggled, the alcohol hitting her empty stomach. "You can't send flowers, silly. It is a lockdown facility. It is way out in the boonies. Oakwood something. Oakwood Manor. No, Oakwood Sanitarium. That is it. It is up past Alpharetta. Brad said it used to be an asylum or something. Spooky, right? But hey, it keeps her from showing up at court on Monday. Oakwood Sanitarium. I committed the name to memory. I had it. I looked at my sister. She was halfway through her second glass, petting the bag that was recording her every word. She looked so proud of herself. She thought she had won a prize. She didn't realize she had just handed me the key to her own destruction. That sounds safe, I said, forcing a smile. It is, Tanisha said, leaning back. And honestly, it is better this way. Mom is happy. I am happy. You should be happy too, Sophia. You are free now. You don't have to worry about the legacy anymore. No, I said, standing up. I don't. Tanisha stood up too, swaying slightly. Well, I should go. Brad is waiting for me to celebrate. He bought Mom a Porsche. Did you see? I saw, I said. She grabbed the Hermes bag. Thanks for the gift, Sophia. I will let the lawyers know you are ready to surrender. She walked to the elevator, her heels clicking, the bag swinging on her arm. She stepped inside and the doors closed, taking the tracking device with her. As soon as she was gone, I dropped the act. I poured my champagne into the sink. The taste of victory was far sweeter than any vintage. I walked over to my desk and opened my laptop. I pulled up the tracking software. The red dot was moving. It was leaving the building. I didn't need to sign any papers. I didn't need to surrender. I knew where they were keeping Hattie. Tanisha had sold out her own grandmother for a handbag, and in doing so, she had given me exactly what I needed to burn their entire operation to the ground. I grabbed my car keys. I wasn't going to sleep. I was going to Oakwood, and I wasn't going alone. I picked up the phone and dialed Tyrell, my head of security. Get the truck, I said. We are going for a ride, and Tyrell, bring the bolt cutters. The drive to Oakwood Sanitarium felt less like a rescue mission and more like a descent into hell. The GPS led us off the main highway and onto a winding, unlit gravel road that cut through the dense Georgia pine forests. The trees towered over the black SUV like prison bars blocking out the moonlight. I sat in the passenger seat, my eyes glued to the tracking dot on my phone, watching as we inched closer to the red beacon that was my grandmother. Tyrell drove in silence, his large hands steady on the wheel, while two of his security team sat in the back checking their flashlights. We didn't look like a family coming for a visit. We looked like a hit squad, and in a way we were. We were coming to kill a conspiracy. The facility emerged from the darkness like a scar on the landscape. It was a sprawling Gothic brick building surrounded by a 10-foot fence topped with razor wire. It didn't look like a place of healing. It looked like a storage unit for people society wanted to forget. The main gate was locked with a heavy industrial chain. Tyrell stopped the car and looked at me. I didn't hesitate. Cut it, I said. Tyrell stepped out into the humid night air. I watched through the windshield as he wielded the bolt cutters. With a sharp metallic snap that echoed through the silent woods, the chain fell away. He pushed the gates open and we drove through. We pulled up to the main entrance, the tires crunching loudly on the gravel. I was out of the car before it fully stopped. My heels sank slightly into the dirt, but I marched toward the sliding glass doors with a fury that burned hot in my chest. The lobby was dim, lit only by the fluorescent glow of the reception desk. A woman sat behind the glass partition wearing stiff blue scrubs and a look of absolute boredom that vanished the moment she saw four people storming toward her. She stood up, her hand reaching for the phone. Do not touch that phone, I commanded, my voice projecting through the glass. The inner doors were locked. Tyrell stepped forward and pried them open with sheer brute force, the automatic motor whining in protest as the glass parted. We stepped into the sanitized air of the facility. It smelled of bleach and decay. The woman behind the desk stepped out. She was tall, with a face like chiseled granite, and a name tag that read, Head Nurse Ratcliffe. She didn't look scared. She looked annoyed. You cannot be here, she barked, moving to block the hallway. Visiting hours ended at 5 o'clock. This is a secure facility. Leave immediately, or I will call the sheriff. I walked right up to her, invading her personal space until I could see the pores on her nose. You must be the one Brad paid off, I said, my voice dangerously low. I am Sophia Miller. The woman you are holding in this building, Hattie Robinson, is my grandmother, and you are going to take me to her right now. Nurse Ratcliffe crossed her arms. Mrs. Robinson is under strict medical quarantine. Her legal guardians, Mr. and Mrs. Miller, have left explicit instructions that she is to have no visitors due to her fragile mental state. She is aggressive and confused. She is not confused, I snapped. She is kidnapped. I pulled a folded piece of paper from my blazer pocket. It wasn't a court order because I didn't have one yet. It was a printout of the Georgia Penal Code. Do you know what the penalty is for false imprisonment and conspiracy to commit fraud? I asked, holding the paper up. It is 20 years, minimum. And do not think for a second that Brad Miller will pay for your legal defense. He is a broke con man who is currently being investigated by the FBI. When he goes down, he is going to take everyone with him. Do you want to die in prison for a man who bounces checks? The nurse's eyes flickered. The mention of Brad being broke hit a nerve. She knew. Of course she knew. I am just doing my job, she stammered, her confidence cracking. The paperwork was signed. The paperwork was based on a fraudulent diagnosis, I interrupted. And you are complicit. Now you have two choices. You can stand there and wait for the police to arrive, at which point I will personally press charges against you for elder abuse and kidnapping. Or you can step aside, give me the keycard, and maybe, just maybe, I will forget your name when I testify. I stared her down. Tyrell loomed behind me, a silent mountain of intimidation. Nurse Ratcliffe looked at the phone, then at me, then at the hallway. Self-preservation 1. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a white keycard. Room 302, she whispered. East Wing. She is sedated. I snatched the card from her hand. If you call Brad, if you make one phone call, I will own this building and turn it into a parking lot before you can file for unemployment. I didn't wait for her response. I ran down the hallway, the linoleum squeaking under my feet. The facility was eerily quiet, just the distant hum of ventilation and the occasional beep of a monitor. Room 302, room 304, room 306. I turned the corner. Room 302 was at the end of a long, shadowy corridor. My hand shook as I held the key card to the reader. The light turned green. The lock clicked. I pushed the door open slowly. The room was dark, the curtains drawn tight. A single machine beeped rhythmically in the corner. I stepped inside, the smell of rubbing alcohol assaulting my senses. "Grandma," I whispered. There was a lump under the thin white blanket. I rushed to the bedside and fumbled for the lamp switch. The light flooded the room, revealing my grandmother. She looked small, so incredibly small. Her silver hair, usually braided perfectly, was loose and messy on the pillow. She was wearing a hospital gown that looked too big for her. An IV line was taped to the back of her hand, pumping a clear fluid into her veins. Her eyes were closed, her breathing shallow and raspy. "Oh God," I choked out, tears instantly blinding me. "Grandma, I am so sorry. I am so sorry I let them take you." I reached out and touched her cheek. It was cold. Anger, hot and violent, surged through me. They had drugged her. They had taken a woman who was vibrant and sharp and reduced her to this. I wanted to burn the world down. I wanted to find Brad and tear him apart with my bare hands. "Grandma, wake up," I pleaded gently, shaking her shoulder. "Please, Hattie, it is Sophia. I am here." For a moment, nothing happened. The beeping of the monitor just continued, mocking me. Then her eyelids fluttered. A low groan escaped her lips. She shifted her brow, furrowing in concentration. "Sophia." Her voice was a dry croak, barely audible. "Yes, Grandma. It is me. I am getting you out of here." She blinked rapidly, fighting the fog of the sedatives. Her eyes, usually so bright, were glassy and dilated. But as she focused on my face, I saw it. The spark. The steel that ran through her bloodline. She wasn't gone. She was just waiting. "I knew you would come," she whispered, forcing a weak smile. Don't talk, I said, reaching for the IV line. I am taking this out. We are leaving. Wait! She rasped her hand, shooting out to grab my wrist. Her grip was weak, but her intention was fierce. Not yet. What, Grandma, we have to go. Brad could be on his way. Listen to me, she hissed, summoning every ounce of strength she had left. They thought I was senile. They thought I didn't know what they were saying in the car. They talked Sophia, Brad and your mother. They talked about everything. I froze. What did they say? They think they won, she said, her breath catching. But I have insurance. Look in the pillow. The pillow. Inside the pillowcase, she whispered. I hid it before the nurse came back. I reached behind her head, sliding my hand inside the rough cotton of the pillowcase. My fingers brushed against something hard and rectangular. I pulled it out. It was a small digital voice recorder, the kind she used to use for dictating memos in the 80s. I always keep it in my purse, she said, her eyes closing again as the exhaustion took over. I turned it on in the van. I recorded it all. The doctor's bribe, the plan to sell the land, and what they did to your father's will years ago. I stared at the device in my hand. It wasn't just evidence of the conservatorship fraud, it was everything. Sophia, she whispered, her voice fading. They didn't just steal the hotel. They stole your life. Play it at the gala. Promise me. I gripped the recorder tight. I promise, Grandma. I looked at Tyrell, who was standing guard at the door. Get the wheelchair, I said, my voice shaking with a new kind of power. We are leaving. And Tyrell, call the FBI. Tell them we have the tape. I carefully pulled the IV needle out of her hand, pressing a cotton ball to the bruise. I lifted my grandmother, the woman who had built an empire, into the wheelchair. She was frail, but in that moment, she was heavier than a mountain. She was the witness, the judge, and the jury, and I was her executioner. We rolled out of room 302, leaving the darkness behind, heading straight for the light of the gala where the final act would begin. The tires of the SUV hummed against the asphalt as we sped back toward Atlanta, leaving the nightmare of the sanitarium behind us in the darkness. My grandmother sat next to me, wrapped in a blanket, her breathing shallow but steady. She looked fragile, like a porcelain doll that had been dropped and glued back together. But her eyes were open, staring at the small digital recorder I held in my hand. It was an outdated piece of technology, scuffed and worn, but it held the power to destroy lives. Play it. Sophia, Grandma whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the engine. You need to hear what a mother is capable of doing to her own child. My thumb hovered over the play button. I was afraid. I had faced boardroom sharks, hostile takeovers, and union strikes, but I was terrified of this plastic button. I pressed it. A burst of static filled the silent car, followed by the sound of a car door slamming. Then Brad's voice cut through the air, loud and distorted, but unmistakably arrogant. Stop crying, Clarissa. It is done. The doctor signed the papers. The old hag is locked away. She can scream all she wants. Nobody listens to crazy people. Then came the sound of my mother weeping. It was a sound I had heard my entire life, a weapon she used to garner sympathy. But this time her words were not those of a victim. Are you sure she can't get out? Clarissa's voice trembled. If she gets to a phone, if she calls Sophia, she won't. Brad snapped. I paid the nurse $5,000 cash. She is going to keep Hattie sedated until the hearing on Monday. By the time she wakes up enough to speak, I will have power of attorney and the hotel will be sold. Sold? Clarissa asked, her voice hitching. But you said we were just going to manage it. You said we were going to keep it in the family. I listened, my heart hammering against my ribs. This was the moment. This was where she could have stopped him. Brad laughed, a cruel, dismissive sound. Manage it. Clarissa, look at the numbers. I owe the syndicate $2 million. If I don't have the cash by Friday, they are going to break my legs, and then they are going to come for you. We are selling the land to the developers. They are going to bulldoze that ugly hotel and put up condos. We take the $40 million, pay off my debts, and move to Europe. I waited for my mother to scream. I waited for her to defend her mother's legacy, to defend the business I had built, to defend the home she lived in. I waited for her to say no. Instead, there was a long pause on the tape. Then Clarissa spoke, her voice small and terrifyingly calm. Okay, but what about Sophia? She will fight us. She has lawyers. Sophia is a nothing, Brad spat. Once we have the conservatorship, we fire her. We evict her. We leave her with nothing. Let her go back to being a nobody. There was another pause. Then Clarissa said the words that severed the last thread of love I had for her. The words that killed the mother I thought I knew and replaced her with a stranger. Just promise me one thing, Brad, she said. Promise me you won't leave me. I know you lied about your past. I know you went to prison. I saw the letters in your drawer. I don't care that you are a crook. Just don't leave me alone. I can't be alone again. I stopped the tape. The silence in the car was heavy, suffocating. I stared out the window at the passing trees, but I didn't see them. I saw my mother. I realized then that she wasn't brainwashed. She wasn't a helpless woman charmed by a con artist. She was a co-conspirator. She knew he was a criminal. She knew he was going to destroy her mother and her daughter, and she didn't care. Her fear of being single, her desperate need for a man's attention was stronger than her love for her own blood. Sophia, Grandma whispered, reaching out to cover my hand with hers. Her skin was paper-thin and cold. I am okay, Grandma, I said, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. It was devoid of emotion. It was hollow. You are not okay, she said. And you shouldn't be. But now you know. You cannot save someone who chooses to drown Sophia. You have spent your whole life trying to buy her love with your success. You thought if you were perfect enough, rich enough, smart enough, she would finally be the mother you needed. But she is empty. She has always been empty. I looked at the recorder. It wasn't just evidence. It was closure. We arrived at the hotel an hour later. Tyrell drove us into the private underground garage to avoid being seen. The gala was tomorrow night, and the press was already camped out front, hungry for the next chapter of the scandal. They didn't know the plot had just twisted. We took the private service elevator up to the penthouse. I wheeled Grandma into the master bedroom, the room that was supposed to be mine but now felt like a sanctuary for the wounded. I didn't call a nurse. I didn't call a doctor. I did it myself. I filled the large soaking tub with warm water and lavender salts. I helped my grandmother out of the filthy hospital gown that smelled of that terrible place. I saw the bruises on her arms where they had held her down. I saw the needle marks. My rage simmered hot and constant, but my hands were gentle. I washed her hair, rinsing away the grease and the smell of antiseptic. I washed her back, feeling the frailty of her spine. She didn't speak. She just let me care for her, accepting the role reversal with a quiet dignity. I wrapped her in the thickest, softest robe I could find and helped her into the massive king-sized bed. She looked small against the white pillows, but the color was returning to her cheeks. The spark was back in her eyes. Get some sleep, Grandma, I said, pulling the duvet up to her chin. Tomorrow is going to be a long day. She reached out and grabbed my wrist. Her grip was stronger now. Where is the dress, she asked. The dress? The gold one. She said, a mischievous glint appearing in her tired eyes. The one I wore to the opening of the hotel 40 years ago. It is in the back of my closet at the house. Did you bring it? I smiled. It was the first time I had smiled in days. I sent Tyrell to get it while I was washing your hair, I said. It is hanging in the dressing room. Good, she said, settling back into the pillows. If I am going to rise from the dead, I want to look like a queen when I do it. I turned off the bedside lamp, leaving the room in a soft, warm glow. I walked out to the living room and poured myself a glass of water. I stood by the window, looking down at the city one last time. Below me, somewhere in a rented mansion paid for with stolen money, Brad and Clarissa were probably sleeping soundly. They thought they had won. They thought Hattie was sedated in a cell. They thought I was broken hiding in my tower. They thought tomorrow night would be their coronation the moment they announced the sale of the empire and walked away with millions. I took a sip of water. I touched the pocket where the recorder sat. Let them sleep, I whispered to the darkness. Let them dream of their yachts and their villas. Because when they wake up, they are going to find out that they didn't just steal a hotel. They stole from the wrong women. I checked my phone. I had one unread message from Tyrell. FBI contact confirmed. They will have agents at the gala disguised as waitstaff. They are waiting for your signal. I typed back a single word. Ready. I put the phone down. I wasn't Sophia the daughter anymore. I wasn't even Sophia the CEO. I was the storm that was about to make landfall, and unlike my mother, I wasn't afraid to be alone. I preferred it. It meant there was no one left to hold me back. The grand ballroom of the Onyx Hotel had transformed into a sea of gold, silk, and crystal for the 50th anniversary gala, but to me, it looked like a funeral parlor dressed up for a wedding. From my vantage point in the darkened technical booth high above the floor, I watched the sharks circling below. The room was packed with the elite of Atlanta, including city council members, real estate moguls, and enough local press to turn a minor scandal into a national headline. They were drinking my grandmother's vintage champagne and eating canapés paid for by the accounts I had built, but none of them knew they were standing on a trap door. At exactly 7:30, the double doors swung open and the crowd parted like the Red Sea. Brad and Clarissa entered, and for a moment the sheer audacity of their performance took my breath away. They looked like royalty, or at least a cheap imitation of it. Brad was wearing a tuxedo that was clearly brand new, likely charged to one of the emergency credit cards he had opened in my mother's name. His hair was slicked back, and his smile was a blinding white veneer of confidence. Hanging on his arm was Clarissa draped in a shimmering silver gown that I recognized immediately. It was a vintage Halston piece from my grandmother's personal collection, a dress Hattie had planned to wear tonight. Seeing it on my mother felt like a physical violation, a desecration of the woman she had helped kidnap. Camera flashes erupted as they walked down the red carpet toward the stage. Clarissa waved her hand displaying a diamond bracelet that also belonged to Hattie, soaking up the attention like a flower starved of sunlight. She looked radiant and terrifyingly happy. This was what she had always wanted to be, the queen of the ball, the center of the universe, with a man by her side who made her feel powerful. She didn't care that the man was a felon. She didn't care that her mother was locked in a sanitarium. She only cared that the cameras were pointed at her. Tanisha followed close behind them, wearing the Hermes bag I had given her like a shield. She was live streaming on her phone, holding the device up to capture the adoring crowd, ensuring her followers saw her proximity to power. She looked smug, oblivious to the fact that the very accessory she was flaunting was currently transmitting her location to the FBI agents who were quietly filtering into the room disguised as waiters and bussers. The chatter in the room grew louder as they approached the stage. I could hear the whispers through the parabolic microphone feed in the booth. Where is Hattie? Where is Sophia? Why are the Millers acting like they own the place? The confusion was palpable. These people knew Hattie Robinson, they knew she never missed an anniversary, and they knew I ran the day-to-day operations. Our absence was a gaping hole in the festivities, but Brad was banking on his charisma to fill the void. He bounded up the stairs to the stage, grabbing the microphone from the master of ceremonies, a confused local news anchor who looked relieved to hand over the responsibility. Brad tapped the mic twice, creating a sharp feedback whine that silenced the room. "Good evening, Atlanta!" Brad bellowed, his voice booming through the speakers. "Thank you all for coming to celebrate this momentous occasion. 50 years of Hattie's heritage. It is truly a legacy to behold." He paused for applause. Clarissa stood slightly behind him, gazing at him with adoring eyes, her hands clasped in front of her. "I know many of you are wondering where the matriarch of this family is tonight." Brad continued, his tone shifting to one of somber concern. "It breaks my heart to tell you that Hattie Robinson has taken a turn for the worse. Her battle with dementia has advanced rapidly in recent days, And under the advice of top medical professionals, we have moved her to a private facility where she can receive the 24-hour care she desperately needs. A ripple of shock went through the crowd. I saw Mrs. Higgins, the neighbor who had seen the ambulance, cover her mouth with her hand. It has been a difficult week for our family. Brad went on gaining momentum, and tragedy often comes in waves. As many of you know, my stepdaughter Sophia has been managing this hotel. However, the pressure of her grandmother's illness combined with her own personal struggles has proven to be too much. It is with deep regret that I announce Sophia has been relieved of her duties, effective immediately, to focus on her mental health. The room erupted in murmurs. I stood frozen in the booth, watching him assassinate my character with a smile. He was painting me as unstable just as he had painted Hattie as senile. It was the perfect cover. If I stormed in screaming now, I would only prove his point. But Brad wasn't finished. He raised a hand, silencing the crowd again. He was drunk on power now, believing his own lie. "Change is hard," he said, smoothing his lapel. "But change is also necessary. For 50 years, this hotel has stood as a monument to the past. But the future belongs to those who are brave enough to evolve. That is why tonight I am proud to announce a historic new chapter for the Miller family." He gestured to the side of the stage where a group of men in dark suits were standing. I recognized them immediately. They were executives from the Omni Group, a massive corporate conglomerate known for buying historic properties, bulldozing them, and building soulless glass condos. As of tomorrow morning, Brad declared, his voice rising to a crescendo, "The Onyx Hotel and the land it sits on will be acquired by the Omni Group. This strategic sale will allow us to liquidate the assets, ensuring that Hattie's care is paid for, and that her legacy lives on in a new modern development that will revitalize downtown Atlanta." The room gasped. This wasn't a merger, it was a liquidation. He was selling the crown jewel of the city for parts. He was tearing down 50 years of Black female entrepreneurship to pay off a gambling debt. Clarissa clapped. She actually clapped. She stood there beaming, clapping her hands for the destruction of her mother's life work, because she believed the lie that this was for the best. She believed they were going to Paris. She didn't know they were going to prison. The press started shouting questions. When is the sale final? How much is the deal worth? Is Sophia commenting? Brad smiled, waving off the questions like a celebrity. "We will be signing the papers tomorrow morning. Tonight we drink. Tonight we celebrate the future." He raised his glass. Clarissa raised hers. Tanisha panned her phone around, capturing the moment. They looked invincible. They stood on that stage, bathed in the spotlight, the undisputed rulers of a kingdom they had stolen. In the tech booth, I turned to Tyrell, who was standing in the shadows behind me. "Is the feed ready?" I asked. Tyrell nodded, his face grim. "We are live on the main projector. Just say the word." I looked down at the stage one last time. I looked at my mother laughing at something Brad whispered in her ear. I looked at the man who had called me a nothing. "Cut the lights," I said. The ballroom plunged into total darkness. The music cut out. The microphones died. For a second there was total silence, followed by the terrified screams of a crowd that didn't know what was happening. Then the massive screen behind the stage flickered to life. But it wasn't the anniversary slideshow Brad had prepared. It was grainy black and white footage from a security camera. And the voice that boomed through the speakers wasn't Brad's polished baritone. It was his real voice, snarling and cruel, captured on a digital recorder hidden in a pillowcase. The gala was over. The trial had begun. The darkness that swallowed the ballroom was absolute. For a heartbeat, the only sound was the confused rustle of silk gowns and the nervous clinking of silverware against china. Brad's voice cut through the blackness, high and tight with panic, shouting for the technical director to fix the lights. But his demand was swallowed by the sudden deafening hum of the massive projector screen descending behind him. A beam of light sliced through the dark, not hitting the stage, but hitting the screen with blinding intensity. The video that began to play was not the polished sentimental montage of the hotel's history that Brad had commissioned. It was a jagged, raw compilation of surveillance footage and shaky cell phone video that Vance and Tyrell had stitched together in the last 3 hours. The first image was crystal clear. It was Brad sitting at a high-stakes baccarat table in a smoky underground room, his face slick with sweat. The timestamp was from 3 days ago, the exact same time he was supposedly at the hospital comforting my grandmother. In the video, Brad shoved a stack of chips into the center of the table. The audio boomed through the ballroom speakers, crisp and damning. "Put the deed to the house on the table," he snarled at the dealer. "My wife doesn't know. She signs whatever I put in front of her." A collective gasp ripped through the audience. I saw Clarissa stiffen on the stage, her hand flying to her mouth. But the video didn't stop. It cut to Tanisha. She was in a dressing room holding up a designer dress, speaking into her phone camera. The timestamp was yesterday. "I can't wait until we sell this dump." Tanisha's voice echoed, dripping with disdain. "Grandma is finally out of the way. We are going to be rich, and I never have to pretend to care about this dusty old hotel again." Then came the final blow. The screen went black, leaving only the audio waveform pulsing in sync with the sound. It was the recording from the pillowcase. It was the conversation that had killed my love for my mother, and now it was about to kill her social standing forever. "She is a stupid old cow," Brad's voice sneered, magnified to a volume that shook the crystal chandeliers. "Clarissa is useful for now, but once the check clears from the developers, I am filing for divorce. I am not spending the rest of my life with a woman that desperate. She is suffocating." The silence that followed was heavier than the darkness. It was the sound of 1,000 people holding their breath at once. Then the spotlight hit the stage. It didn't land on Brad, who was frantically signaling for the sound to be cut. It didn't land on Clarissa, who had collapsed to her knees, her face buried in her hands. The light landed on the top of the grand staircase. Grandma Hattie stood there. She was not in a wheelchair. She was not wearing a hospital gown. She was draped in gold. The vintage Halston gown shimmered under the light, a suit of armor made of sequins and silk. Her silver hair was piled high on her head, crowned with a diamond clip. She stood tall, her back straight, gripping her cane not for support but like a scepter of judgment. She began to descend the stairs, step by step, slow, deliberate. The clicking of her heels was the only sound in the cavernous room. The crowd parted instinctively, creating a wide path for the woman they had been told was insane. Brad looked up. The color drained from his face so completely that he looked like a corpse standing upright. He took a stumbling step back, nearly tripping over the microphone stand. "Hattie," he whispered, his voice picked up by the live mic he had forgotten to turn off. "But you are crazy." Hattie finished the sentence for him. Her voice didn't need a microphone. It carried the weight of 50 years of command. She reached the bottom of the stairs and walked onto the stage, moving past my sobbing mother without a glance. She walked straight up to Brad, who seemed to shrink in her presence. She snatched the microphone from his trembling hand. "Who told you I was crazy, Bradley?" she asked, her voice calm, conversational, which made it infinitely more terrifying. "Was it the doctor you bribed with $10,000? Or was it your own arrogance that made you believe a woman of my age is simply a disposable asset?" She turned to the crowd. The press was in a frenzy, cameras flashing like strobes capturing the resurrection of the matriarch. "I apologize for the deception," Hattie addressed the room. "My son-in-law told you I was suffering from dementia. He told you I was confused. He told you I didn't know who I was." She reached into the pocket of her gold dress and pulled out a thick stack of papers. She held them up. "This is a certified evaluation from the chief of neurology at Emory Hospital, conducted this morning," she declared. "It states that my cognitive functions are perfect. It states that I am of sound mind and body. And this." She pulled out a second document, this one stamped with the seal of the federal court. "This is a restraining order and a formal indictment filed an hour ago against Bradley Miller and Clarissa Miller for conspiracy to commit fraud, elder abuse, and grand larceny. Brad lunged. It was the desperate, animalistic move of a cornered rat. He reached for the papers, his face twisted in a snarl. "Give me that, you senile old witch!" But he never touched her. Before he could close the distance, Tyrell emerged from the side curtain. He didn't just step in, he collided with Brad. It was a wall of muscle meeting a bag of hollow threats. Tyrell shoved Brad back hard. Brad flew across the stage, crashing into the podium, sending the floral arrangements toppling over him in a shower of water and petals. The crowd screamed. Security guards flooded the stage, but Hattie didn't flinch. She didn't even look at Brad. She looked at Clarissa. My mother looked up, her mascara running in black rivers down her face. "Mom," she wept, reaching out a hand. "I didn't know. He told me you were sick." Hattie looked down at her daughter. There was no hate in her eyes, only a profound, icy disappointment that was far worse than anger. "You knew," Clarissa Hattie said into the microphone, letting the whole world hear the verdict. "You heard him call me a burden. You heard him plan to sell my legacy. And you said nothing because you were afraid of being alone. Well, congratulations, my dear. You have your wish. You are not alone. You have him." She gestured to Brad, who was struggling to stand up in the puddle of water. "And you deserve each other," Hattie finished. She turned back to the audience. The shock in the room had shifted to awe. They were witnessing a titan reclaim her throne. "The sale to the Omni Group is cancelled," Hattie announced, her voice ringing with finality. "The Onyx Hotel is not for sale. It never was. And as for the management," she looked up at the tech booth, straight at the darkened window where I was standing, "I am reinstating Sophia Miller as the CEO effective immediately. And unlike the previous management, she doesn't need to steal from this family to run a business. She built it." The room erupted. It wasn't polite applause. It was a roar. It was the sound of justice being served hot and fresh. I watched from the booth as the FBI agents who had been blending in as waiters finally made their move. They dropped their trays and ascended the stage, their badges glinting under the lights. Brad saw them coming. He looked left, then right. There was nowhere to run. The exit was blocked by the press. The stage was blocked by security. He looked at Clarissa, hoping for a savior, but she was still on her knees staring at the floor, broken by the public revelation that her husband despised her. The first agent grabbed Brad's arm. He spun him around. The sound of the handcuffs ratcheting shut was faint, but to me it was the loudest, sweetest sound in the world. Hattie stood center stage, bathed in gold light, watching the man who tried to bury her being dragged away in chains. She didn't smile. She just adjusted her shawl, looked at the camera, and gave a single imperious nod. The Queen had returned and the execution was complete. The applause that had erupted for my grandmother died down instantly, replaced by the heavy authoritative boots of federal agents hitting the hardwood stage. It was a sound that commanded silence. There were 6 of them, moving with the synchronized precision of a pack of wolves closing in on a wounded deer. They were not wearing tuxedos. They were wearing windbreakers with 3 yellow letters emblazoned on the back that made every wealthy person in the room freeze. FBI. Brad saw them coming, and his survival instinct finally kicked in, but it was pathetic to watch. He scrambled backward, slipping on the water from the overturned flower vases, his expensive Italian shoes finding no traction. He looked toward the wings of the stage, but 2 agents blocked the exit. He looked toward the crowd, but the audience was a wall of judgmental stares. "Do not touch me!" Brad screamed, his voice cracking like a teenager's. "I am a businessman. This is a misunderstanding. I have rights." "You have the right to remain silent," the lead agent barked, grabbing Brad's shoulder and spinning him around. "But I suggest you start using that right immediately because you have talked enough." The agent slammed Brad against the podium, the sound of his chest hitting the wood echoing through the microphone that was still live. Brad grunted in pain. The agent pulled Brad's arms behind his back. Then came the sound. the metallic ratchet of handcuffs locking into place. Click, click. It was the sweetest music I had ever heard. Bradley Miller. The agent announced loud enough for the back row to hear. You are under arrest for wire fraud, money laundering, aggravated identity theft, and conspiracy to commit elder abuse. I didn't do it, Brad shrieked, struggling against the cuffs. It was her. It was the old lady. She is setting me up. Clarissa. Clarissa, tell them. He looked desperately for my mother, but Clarissa was frozen. She was staring at the handcuffs as if they were a foreign object she couldn't comprehend. Her brain, warped by years of desperate dependency, was trying to reject the reality unfolding before her. She didn't see a criminal being apprehended. She saw her husband, her provider, her last chance at happiness being taken away. The agents hauled Brad off the stage. They didn't take him out the back way. They marched him right down the center aisle through the crowd he had tried to swindle. The cameras flashed relentlessly, blinding him, capturing every drop of sweat on his forehead, every grimace of fear. The reporters thrust microphones in his face, shouting questions. Where is the money, Brad? How long have you been conning them? Brad hung his head, trying to hide from the lights, but there was no hiding. The walk of shame was long and brutal. I watched from the tech booth, feeling a cold, hard knot loosen in my chest. He was small. He was so small. Without his lies, without my family's money to prop him up, he was just a petty crook in a rented suit. But then, the spell on my mother broke. No, Clarissa screamed a sound so raw it made people flinch. Stop! You can't take him! She scrambled to her feet, tripping over the hem of Hattie's vintage gold dress. She didn't look at her mother, who was standing tall and victorious on the stage. She didn't look at me. She only had eyes for Brad. She ran down the stairs, nearly falling, her heels clacking frantically on the steps. He is innocent, she wailed, pushing past a stunned waiter. He is a good man. He was trying to save us. She ran down the aisle, chasing the FBI agents, reaching out her hand as if she could physically pull Brad back from the precipice of justice. The guests pulled back in horror. It was embarrassing. It was tragic. A 55-year-old woman debasing herself for a man who had been caught on tape calling her a stupid cow. Clarissa, Brad yelled over his shoulder, seeing her approach. Call the lawyer. Call the Cayman accounts. Get the money. Shut up, the agent yelled, pushing Brad forward faster. They burst through the double doors of the ballroom and out into the lobby. I turned to Tyrell. Let's go, I said. We took the service stairs, taking them two at a time. I needed to see this to the end. I needed to make sure the door closed on this chapter forever. When we reached the front entrance of the hotel, the scene was chaotic. Blue and red lights from the police cruisers washed over the limestone facade of the Onyx, turning the elegant building into a crime scene. A crowd had gathered on the sidewalk, tourists and passers-by, drawn by the commotion. The agents were shoving Brad into the back of an unmarked black SUV. He was still shouting threats, claiming he knew senators, claiming he would sue the FBI. The agent slammed the door, shutting off his noise. Clarissa reached the car just as the door closed. She hammered her fists against the tinted window. Brad, look at me. I am here. I will get you out, ma'am. Step back, a police officer said firmly, grabbing her arm to pull her away from the moving vehicle. No! That is my husband! Clarissa screamed, fighting the officer. You are making a mistake. He loves me. The SUV peeled away, sirens wailing, disappearing into the Atlanta night. Clarissa collapsed on the curb. Her dress was torn. Her mascara was smeared across her cheeks like war paint. She sat there in the dirt, weeping heaving sobs that shook her entire body. The press was kept back by the police line, but they were still filming. I stepped out of the hotel doors. The cool night air hit my face. I walked past the cameras. I walked past the officers. I walked right up to the woman sitting on the concrete. I stood over her. I didn't offer a hand. I didn't offer a tissue. Clarissa looked up. She saw me. And in that second, her grief turned into a white-hot rage. She scrambled to her feet, stumbling slightly before finding her balance. She lunged at me, grabbing the lapels of my blazer. Why, she screamed, shaking me. Why did you do this? Why did you have to ruin everything? I stood still, letting her shake me. I felt nothing. He was going to take us to Paris, she sobbed, spittle flying from her mouth. We were going to be happy. He was finally fixing the mess your father left. Why did you have to call the police? Why did you have to do that to your own father? I reached up and removed her hands from my jacket. I did it slowly, deliberately, one finger at a time. I held her wrists for a moment, looking into her bloodshot eyes. He is not my father, I said, my voice low and steady, cutting through her hysteria. He was the man of this house, Clarissa shrieked, pulling away. He was family, and you chose money over family. You chose a building over my happiness. No, Mom, I said. I chose dignity over a delusion. Delusion, she laughed, a manic, broken sound. You are just jealous. You have always been jealous that I had someone and you were alone. You wanted to destroy him because he saw through you. He knew you were cold. He knew you were selfish. I stepped closer to her. I wanted her to hear this. I wanted her to remember this moment for the rest of her life. He didn't know me, Mom, and neither do you. But let's be clear about one thing. I didn't destroy him. He destroyed himself. He was a criminal. He was stealing from us. He kidnapped your mother. He did it for us, Clarissa yelled, defending the indefensible. He did it to save the family fortune. He called you a stupid cow on tape, I reminded her, my voice devoid of pity. He said he was going to divorce you the minute the check cleared. He despised you. He was using you. And you let him. Clarissa flinched as if I had slapped her. She shook her head, covering her ears. No, he didn't mean it. He was just stressed. You don't understand love. I looked at this woman, this shell of a human being, who would rather believe a comfortable lie than face a painful truth. I understand love perfectly, I said. Love is protecting the people who are vulnerable. Love is not letting a predator lock your mother in an asylum. Love is not watching your daughter get evicted so you can keep a man. I turned to walk away. I was done. There was nothing left to say. Where are you going? Clarissa screamed behind me. You can't leave me here. My car keys are in his pocket. I have no way home, Sophia. Come back here, I am your mother. I stopped. I didn't turn around. You chose him. Clarissa, I said to the empty air. You stood on that stage and clapped while he sold our legacy. You picked your side. But I am your mother, she wailed, her voice breaking. And that I said, walking toward the hotel doors where Tyrell was waiting to let me back into my empire. Is the only reason I am not pressing charges against you too. I walked back into the light of the hotel, leaving her in the darkness of the street. The heavy glass doors slid shut behind me, cutting off the sound of her screaming my name. I took a deep breath. The air inside smelled of lilies and victory. It was over. The trash had been taken out. Now it was time to rebuild. The morning sun over Buckhead was unforgiving, exposing every crack in the facade my family had spent a lifetime building. It was 10 in the morning when the taxi dropped Clarissa and Tanisha off at the wrought iron gates of the estate. They looked like refugees from a glamorous war zone. My mother was still wearing the ruined vintage Halston gown from the night before, the gold sequins dull and missing in patches, her hair a tangled mess of hairspray and despair. Tanisha trailed behind her, wearing sweatpants she must have pulled from her gym bag in the car, looking less like an influencer and more like a sullen teenager who had been grounded by reality. I watched them from the monitor in the security booth stationed just inside the gate. They didn't see me. They only saw the house, the sprawling white mansion with its manicured lawns and towering pillars, the symbol of the status they believed was their birthright. They walked up the long driveway, their steps heavy but determined. Clarissa was already muttering to herself, rehearsing the speech she would give me, when I inevitably came crawling back to apologize. She truly believed that after a good night's sleep and a hot bath, the nightmare of the gala would fade, and she would reclaim her throne. They reached the massive oak front doors. Clarissa dug into her clutch, her hands shaking as she pulled out her key ring. She selected the brass key, the one she had carried for 20 years, the one that opened the kingdom. She slid it into the lock. She turned it. Nothing happened. She frowned, jiggling the handle. She pulled the key out, wiped it on her dress, and tried again. She twisted it harder this time, panic beginning to seep into her movements. The lock remained solid, unyielding. "What is wrong with it?" Tanisha snapped, standing behind her, shivering in the morning chill. "Just open the door, Mom. I need to charge my phone." "It is stuck," Clarissa hissed, jamming the key in for a third time. "It won't turn. That idiot gardener must have messed with the tumblers again." She began to pound on the wood with her fist. "Open up, Consuela! Open this door right now!" The door did not open, but a voice spoke from behind them. "Consuela doesn't work here anymore, Mom. I gave the staff the day off." Clarissa and Tanisha spun around. I was sitting on the porch swing, hidden by the shadows of the veranda. I stood up slowly, smoothing the lapels of my cream-colored suit. I held a cup of coffee in my hand, the steam rising in the crisp air. Beside me stood Sheriff Reynolds, a man who had known our family for decades, a man who looked at my mother now not with respect, but with pity. "Sophia." Clarissa breathed, letting out a hysterical laugh of relief. "Oh, thank God. You are here. The lock is broken. Tell the sheriff to help us. We need to get inside. I need to call Brad's lawyer. This whole thing is a misunderstanding." She took a step toward the door, reaching for the handle again, as if my presence alone fixed the problem. "The lock isn't broken, Clarissa," I said, my voice carrying across the porch without me raising it. "It has been changed." "Changed?" She stopped, blinking rapidly. "Why would you change the locks? This is my house. Open the door, Sophia. I am exhausted and I am in no mood for your power games." I took a sip of my coffee, letting the silence stretch just long enough to be uncomfortable. "It is not your house," I said simply. Clarissa's face twisted in confusion. "What are you talking about?" "Your father bought this house. My name is on the deed." "Your name was on the deed," I corrected her, "until 3 months ago, when Brad convinced you to leverage the property to secure a high-risk loan from his private lenders. You signed the title over to a holding company controlled by Hattie's Heritage Group to hide the asset. Do you remember that Mom Brad told you it was for tax purposes?" Clarissa went pale. No, that was just paperwork. It didn't mean anything. It meant everything I said walking down the steps until I was standing on the gravel driveway with them. It means that technically this house is corporate housing. It is a residential asset owned by the hotel chain designated for the use of the chief executive officer or their immediate dependents, as long as they are in good standing with the company. I looked at the sheriff. He nodded, confirming the legality of my words. "Brad was the president of operations," I continued. "That gave him the right to live here. And as his wife, you were a guest. But as of last night, Brad has been terminated for cause. He is currently in federal custody, facing 20 years in prison. And since he is no longer an employee, his housing privileges have been revoked immediately." Clarissa stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "You are evicting us. You are kicking your own mother out of her home because of a technicality." "It is not a technicality," I said, my voice hardening. "It is the law. And you are not just my mother anymore, Clarissa. You are a liability. You conspired to defraud the company. You aided and abetted a felon." The board of directors met this morning at 7 o'clock. We voted unanimously to cleanse the company of all toxic assets. That includes you. Tanisha stepped forward, her face flushed with rage. "You can't do this, Sophia. This is illegal. I live here too. My stuff is in there. My clothes, my jewelry, my laptop. You can't just lock us out from our own things." I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. "I would never keep your belongings, Tanisha," I said. "I am not a thief, unlike some people in this family." I gestured to the side of the driveway near the service gate. Clarissa and Tanisha turned to look. There, piled neatly on the asphalt, were 20 large black industrial trash bags. They were bulging at the seams. A sleeve of a Gucci coat poked out of one. The handle of a Louis Vuitton trunk stuck out of another. "I had the movers pack for you," I said. "Everything is there. Your clothes, your shoes, your makeup. Even that toaster you love so much, Mom. It is all in the bags." Clarissa let out a strangled scream. She ran over to the pile, tearing at the plastic. She pulled out a silk blouse, now wrinkled and stuffed next to a pair of muddy boots. "You put my clothes in garbage bags," she shrieked, looking at me with pure hatred. "These are designer. This is vintage. How could you?" "It seemed fitting," I said, coldness radiating from me like a force field. "You treated my grandmother like garbage. You treated me like garbage. I thought you would be comfortable with the aesthetic." Clarissa dropped the blouse and charged at me, her hands curled into claws. "I will kill you, you ungrateful little witch. I will take you to court. I will destroy you." Sheriff Reynolds stepped in front of me, his hand resting on his belt. "That is enough, Mrs. Miller," he warned, his voice deep and authoritative. "Step back." Clarissa stopped, panting, her chest heaving. She looked at the sheriff, then at the house, then at me. The reality finally crashed down on her. The gates were closed. The locks were changed. The money was gone. "You can't leave us here," she whispered, her voice breaking into a sob. "We have nowhere to go. The accounts are frozen. We have no cash. Sophia, please." "Where are we supposed to sleep?" I looked at the woman who had told me to sleep on the street just a few days ago. I looked at the sister who had laughed when I was evicted. "I heard the Motel 6 on the interstate has vacancies," I said, checking my watch. "Or maybe you can stay with one of those rich friends you were trying to impress at the gala." "Oh, wait. They all saw the video, didn't they? I doubt they are answering your calls." Tanisha started to cry, kicking one of the trash bags. "This isn't fair. I didn't do anything. I just wanted to be happy." "You wanted to be rich without working," I corrected her. "And now you have the opportunity to build character." I turned my back on them, walking up the steps to the porch. I put my hand on the doorknob. "Sheriff," I said over my shoulder, "how long do they have before they are considered to be trespassing on private property?" The sheriff checked his watch. "I would say about 10 minutes, Ms. Miller. After that, I will have to arrest them for loitering." I looked back at my mother and sister one last time. They were standing amidst the garbage bags, stripped of their dignity, stripped of their power, left with nothing but the consequences of their own choices. "You heard the man," I said, pushing the heavy oak door open. "You have 10 minutes to get your trash off my driveway. I suggest you start walking." I stepped inside the house and closed the door. The sound of the heavy lock clicking into place was final. I stood in the foyer, breathing in the silence. The air smelled of lemon polish and peace. I walked over to the mirror in the hallway and looked at myself. I didn't see a victim. I didn't see a scapegoat. I saw the owner. I saw the survivor. Outside, I could hear Clarissa screaming at the sky, but inside my house, and inside my heart, it was finally quiet. The war was over, and I had won. The trial of Bradley Miller lasted 3 weeks and was the most watched event on local news in a decade. I sat in the front row every single day holding my grandmother's hand, while the prosecution laid out the mountain of evidence we had gathered. Brad tried to charm the jury the same way he had charmed my mother, but 12 citizens of Georgia were not impressed by a man who stole from the elderly. When the judge read the verdict, Brad did not scream. He simply slumped in his chair, deflated and gray, looking every bit the small man he truly was. 15 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. As the bailiffs led him away, he looked back at the gallery searching for Clarissa. But she wasn't there. She was too ashamed to show her face. Justice has a way of balancing the scales that no amount of money can buy. While Brad adjusted to life in a 6x8 cell, my mother and sister were learning a different kind of confinement. The reality of poverty. Clarissa, who once turned up her nose at anything that wasn't designer, now lives in a 1-bedroom subsidized apartment on the outskirts of the city. She sends me letters once a week, long rambling handwritten notes begging for forgiveness, begging for money, begging for just one lunch. I read them once, then I shred them. I do not hate her anymore. I simply feel nothing. She chose her path when she stood on that stage and clapped for my destruction. She is free to live her life, but she is no longer welcome in mine. Tanisha's fall was perhaps the hardest because she had the farthest to drop. The girl who wanted to be an influencer found out quickly that likes do not pay rent. With no degree, no work experience, and a reputation ruined by the scandal, she struggled to find employment. Last week I had a business lunch at a diner downtown. I went to the back to thank the chef for the meal, and through the swinging doors of the kitchen I saw her. Tanisha was standing over a sink full of dirty, grease-covered pans, wearing a rubber apron. Her hair tied back in a messy bun, scrubbing a plate. She looked up and saw me. For a second our eyes locked. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just nodded and walked away. She wanted a free ride, but life handed her a sponge. As for Hattie's heritage, we did not just survive, we thrived. The publicity from the trial turned the onyx into a symbol of resilience. Bookings skyrocketed. We expanded, opening our first international location in London last month. But the achievement I am most proud of is not the revenue. It is the Hattie Robinson Foundation. We launched it on my 33rd birthday, using the profits from the hotel to provide legal aid and secure housing for elderly victims of financial abuse. Every day we help women, just like Grandma, reclaim their dignity from predators like Brad. The sun is setting now, casting a warm, golden glow over the private dining room where this story began 1 year ago. The table is set with white linens and fresh lilies. But tonight the room is not filled with tension or greed. It is filled with laughter. Grandma sits across from me, looking radiant in a blue silk dress. She is raising a glass of sparkling cider, her eyes clear and full of mischief. To us, she says, clinking her glass against mine, to the survivors. I smile, taking a sip. To us, Grandma. We eat in comfortable silence, enjoying the peace we fought so hard to win. I look at her, and I realize that everything I went through, the betrayal, the fear, the public humiliation, was worth it. It burned away the dead wood in my life and left only what was strong and true. I used to think family was the people you were born to. I thought it was shared DNA and holidays and obligation. But looking at the empty chairs where my mother and sister used to sit and feeling no sense of loss, I know the truth now. Family is not biology. Family is loyalty. Family is the people who stand beside you when the world is throwing stones. Family is the people who would never sell you out for a check. I have a smaller table now, but it is surrounded by more love than I ever had when the room was full. If you are watching this and you are holding on to toxic people just because they share your last name, let this be your sign to let go. You can build your own empire. You can choose your own family. And sometimes the best way to honor your future is to evict your past. Thank you for watching my story. If you have ever had to cut ties to save your peace, tell me about it in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe for more stories of justice and resilience. My name is Sophia, and this is my legacy. The war is over, and I am finally home. This journey taught me that true family is defined by loyalty, not DNA. My mother proved that toxicity often wears a familiar face, but she also taught me that my dignity is not for sale. I learned that standing alone in your truth is infinitely more powerful than sitting at a table where you are merely tolerated. Success isn't just about wealth. It's about the courage to protect your legacy from those who feel entitled to your labor. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is evict your past to make room for the future you deserve. Call to action, CTA. If you have ever had to cut ties to save your sanity, hit like and subscribe for more stories of resilience. Share your truth in the comments. I read every single one.